Yes, I'm right there with you, LeVar. How's the studying going? Did you get any studying done over the holiday? It's okay if you didn't. Holidays aren't built for studying. You've got enough to do. But now it's time to buckle up, isn't it? Because we're right in the middle of the triple burger of that sandwich, which is this course. Because we're finishing up with agency tonight, launching right into contracts, basic contract law, which is only an hour and a half material. Then 10 is a big one. And they could be the same chapter. They may as well be the same chapter, 9 and 10. Because it's all, oh no, yikes, dog chewed up the homework. Classic. 9 and 10 is a big one. Then 14 and 15 is finance. That's another big one where a lot of questions come from. So stay on top of it. We left off around this point last week, and good. A lot of you took the quarter term test, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and do so. Good question. What part of the syllabus are we starting on? Let me show you. As to the syllabus, we are, forgive my green screen there, it is doggy messed up. So one way to find it, if you open yours up, I don't know what you're using, but if you have Adobe or some sort of a thing where you can go up to the file button or somewhere where the menus are and look for the word find, if it gives you a way to search the document, you could pick a word that's pretty unique to the chapter, and I'm just going to use the word Sherman and hit that, and it brings me pretty darn close. And it looks like page 45, and I think that's the syllabus I've given you. I think this is the instructor syllabus. But as to the letters and numbers, we're in 8, section 8. We've made our way through letter A, the requirements for earning a fee. Got to have a real estate license. We learned that the first week. In this case, it's a fee for being a listing agent. Got to have a listing agreement signed in writing. Can you go ahead and list and do listing activities without something in writing? Is there such a thing as oral listing agency or oral seller's agency? The only thing allowable that you can go ahead and embark upon for someone that is not required in writing is buyer's agency. But you cannot do any listing activity unless you have a written listing agreement. No listing activity allowed, period. They're not going to test you on why, but you just need to know that there is a difference between buyer's agency and listing agency, and that's one of them. Besides the fact that you're representing a seller versus a buyer. You can't represent a seller at all until it's in writing. You are allowed to represent a buyer without it being in writing, but for a limited time. What's the maximum amount of time, not necessarily calendar time, but the maximum amount of time you can represent a buyer as an oral buyer agent, oral buyer agency, non-written? Giving them a chance to kind of try you out, kick your tires, so to speak. How much time can you do that with them? More specifically, a better way to ask that is, what part of the relationship or what part of the transaction is the point at which you have to put that oral buyer agency agreement in writing? Got getting a couple of them coming in now. Good. That's at the time of offer. Exactly right. You could show people houses for months and months and months and years, frankly. And if they never get to the point of wanting to put in an offer, then you could still act without buyer agency being in writing. Not a good way to make money because you won't make any. But you could be a buyer agent, an oral buyer agent for all of that time. And I bet there are some agents out there who do go a long time before that person makes an offer, because sometimes people just kind of like to look at houses. I've heard stories of agents that end up getting kind of screwed over because they didn't realize this wasn't a buyer. This was a looker, a professional looker. And they just liked having your company because you're so darn cute and fun to be around, right? So be careful. That's a business decision. How long do you go before you require them to put that buyer agency agreement in writing? That could be a thing that you choose in your business practice, or your firm requires, or your firm trains you on. Hey, look out. Maybe give them the first time or two. Maybe tell them, this is how I work. I know you don't know me yet. Let me prove to you that I'm going to take good care of you, and I'll give you today. I'll show you 3, or I'll show you just the only ones in this neighborhood this afternoon, all 3 of them. And if we decide to work together after this, great, we'll move forward. But if not, we'll decide that it's just not working. That's a sort of a nice little power move, a little bit of a flex, because the internet, the way we've given permission to other websites, home search related websites, to use our data, because we get that listing, our firm's listing, probably because we had that relationship with that seller. And we put it in the MLS, and we gave the MLS permission to share that data with these other websites. Homes.com, Zillow, Realtor.com, name it, any of them. Any of those who then do Google advertising, so that when someone searches for 300,000 maximum price point, 3-bedroom, single level, this house pops up in the rankings. They stumble across. Have you ever done that? Do a search on Google sometime. Pick a price point, pick a number of bedrooms and a 1-story versus 2, whatever it is, and just see what the search results come back at. Let me do it. Let's just see what happens. So just a straight up Google search. Let's see. We'll make it 500,000 in Concord, North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, ranch. And we're going to have the first little batch of things that are sponsored, meaning they're paying for their results to be first. Then we start getting to the non-sponsored, and there we go, homes.com. They have such a powerful amount of what I call Google juice, right? So much SEO, search engine optimization, for these various terms, that they pop up first. And then if we keep on going, there's another same search for homes. There's Redfin, there's Zillow. I'm surprised they're not the first one. There's now we're getting into individual agents. That's pretty good for an individual agent website to be like top 10. Realtor.com, and another company, Zillow again. So that's kind of how it works. And sometimes people just pick on the first one that's not a sponsored ad. And here's just a basic, what's called IDX search, Internet Data Exchange. You don't need to know that. But it's the thing that allows the MLS. It's the thing that allows the website to pull the data from the MLS. So I have signed an agreement, an IDX, Internet Data Exchange agreement, with the MLS of my market, and I said, yep, you can allow my listings to go out to the world in these various websites. Then if you click on one, in this case, this website gives you the listing agent. I respect that. I like that. Pictures, details. The other ones, some of them take a little bit of a different approach. We click on Zillow, and it brings up another kind of version of this. It gives us a chance to contact the agent, or it says contact agent, put in info. And now once we do that, Zillow has that contact info, and they sell it as a lead to agents willing to pay X dollars per month. Whoever's willing to pay the most. The top 5, I think. So when people go down through and click on an agent info, it's probably not necessarily the listing agent. And that's just how it works. Oh, request a tour. If we do that, probably going to end up being one of those other agents that is not necessarily the listing agent. And if you've ever done that and put in your info, be ready. You're going to get calls by a bunch of agents that are not the listing agent. And it's allowable because we gave them permission. Okay, there we go. So Sherman Antitrust Act, a couple things about that. Number one thing, if you're on Facebook and in a real estate group or somewhere you're reading a conversation between real estate brokers and consumers, maybe, and they say, hey, what's the standard commission rate in your city? And someone says, oh, it's 6%. Now, what are you going to think in your mind? Green light, everything's normal, that's okay. Or flashing red light, not allowed, can't do it. And you can choose whether to be the know-it-all and offer your 2 cents and say, don't do that. Or just keep quiet, your business, but they shouldn't do it. Everything's negotiable. There is no standard commission rate. That's the number one feature of the Sherman Antitrust Act, but there are others because Sherman Antitrust has to do with protecting consumers. It is legislation in place to protect consumers. How does it protect the consumer to not allow there to be a standard commission rate that all firms charge less than X? How does that help the consumer? You got it. Prevents the price jacking up of commissions. That's a great way to say it. Didn't stop the lawsuits from happening. People still think the commissions are being jacked up and resulting in inflated artificial values, but that's another thing. Thankfully, you won't be tested on the lawsuits in this exam. Yeah. The idea that the consumer doesn't have a choice to maybe hire somebody that charges 1% instead of 6%. If you ever see that, you ever noticed, now you will, because you haven't really probably been in the market or been tuned in to real estate. But if you have noticed, some companies, some firms say things like, I will do a 1% commission. Wow, that's ugly. My dog is laying on the screen and pulling it. How does that work? How can somebody, if some agents are charging 6%, but then others are charging 1%, how does that work? What do you see as maybe a problem with the difference in those commission rates? First of all, the one who's charging 6, are they making the entire 6 all to themselves? That listing firm? They're probably splitting it, sharing it. They're cooperating. Yeah, they're sharing it. And it could be any mixture. It could be even. It could be an even split. So the listing firm is getting 3 and the buyers, let me do it properly because they'll probably use the term sellers. Oops. Okay. Yeah, listing firm and selling firm. The one for the sellers and the one for the buyers. Oops. Or it could be 3-2, or it could be 2.5, 3.5. Or instead of 6, it could be 5 or 4 or whatever, or 7 for that matter. We can go up. But over here, if another broker says, look, I'll do better than that. I'm not going to charge you these inflated fees. I'll just charge you 1%. Does a buyer agent fee get included in that 1%? Here's the thing they're not telling you. You have to read the fine print to find out. The 1% that they are bragging about is just to them. With a lot of these 1% listing arrangements, 1% is going to the listing firm, and then something is going to the selling firm that they will disclose later. On the listing appointment, they'll say, oh, by the way, the 1% is what you're paying me, but you're going to need to pay something to an agent bringing the buyer, or else they won't show your house. So they're really not disclosing the full story if they say, I'm a 1% broker. They're not necessarily lying. They're just not telling the whole thing. Got to read the fine print, right? And it could be that they propose to pay 2.5% or 3% to the buyer agent. So in that case, they're really a 3.5% solution total. If you're comparing it apples to apples with this guy, which is still obviously saving a lot of money. But then the next question is, if you're this broker competing against this broker, how do you compete against a broker charging less? You talk about the extra stuff you're doing that they are not, because you can't do as much stuff. Well, I guess you could. Thing is, they're probably not doing as much stuff as you are. If you're a full service broker and they are this kind of broker, by the way, what is it called? Don't call it this. Don't call it a discount broker. Call this broker who chooses to reduce commission a limited service broker. The commission says they're doing less. They're charging less because they're doing less. And that menu of services, where maybe the bulk of it is for the MLS access, some of it might be photos. If you don't want to pay for photos, then I will charge you that much less, and you, seller, have to provide your own photos. Beware. I've seen some pretty lousy photos. That's really your best selling method online to get them excited, is good photos. Could be video, it could be ads, Facebook, social media, Instagram ads, could be good old-fashioned print ads, your relationship, your network with other brokers that you can tell about your listings, all manner of things, you name it. Which thing do you want, seller? I am a limited service broker. I will do 1% to myself if all you want is the MLS, and I'll do maybe 5 photos. If you want all 40 some photos that the MLS can have, you can put as many as 40 in our MLS. If you want a walkthrough video or a virtual tour or a certain amount of ad, like an ad package, or you want me to tell the top agents who sell similar houses as this, whatever it might be, right? They might even have tiers, levels, and you could do this too as a full service. You could say, here's what you get with a 5% tier commission, or if you want 6, or if you want 7. When you're a full service broker charging whatever you want to charge, you could set this up however you want to, just disclose it. And a lot of times when people do charge tiers like this in any industry, they're strategic and they load up the one they really want, which is probably the middle one for psychological purposes, right? You can't quite bring yourself to pick the top one, and you don't want to be the cheapskate for the bottom one, but this 6 level probably has all you need. The 7 might have aerial photos, more fancier, blah, blah, blah. The 5 might be pretty bare bones. So that's an option, but you would need to make sure who is on board with you offering this tier structure of pricing. Number 1, stop to ask, can I do this? Who do you ask first before you tell the world that you'd be open to offering packages? The firm. You're big. Perfect. Good job. Because it is their listing after all. Okay. Other things that Sherman Antitrust incorporates is, let me see if I have it close by here, market allocation. Can't have firms getting together and saying, look, I'll stay out of your side of town, you stay out of my side of town, because that makes the consumer have fewer choices. Now the consumer can only pick firm C if they live in that pink section, or firm D if they live in that southwest red section. Not allowable under Sherman antitrust. Another one is boycotting. Again, it's all about limiting their choices. All of these things with Sherman antitrust is about limiting the consumer's choices illegally. And if a firm gets together with other firms and says, hey, that home inspector, we don't like him, he's too nitpicky, let's get together and never hire him and run him out of business. Illegal under Sherman antitrust. What do we do? What are we going to talk about when it comes to the agency relationship when we first meet a client, a potential client? Let's say we're on a listing appointment. What's the first conversation we need to have? They are going to, you're 80% sure they're going to hire you tonight. So the very first conversation about agency you need to have with them involves what? Got some quick answers. That's good. We're not going to pull out the listing agreement first, although we're not going to take too much time to do it, because if they're in the signing mood, let's go ahead and get it signed. Don't talk them out of it and tell them too much stuff. Learn how to take yes for an answer, but to do it properly, let's make sure we cover this. Great job. We need to have that conversation about the working with real estate agents disclosure and have them sign that first, because they need to understand what's the number one point we're trying to get across with this disclosure. What's the number one thing we're trying to explain to them with this document? How agency works. Let's get into the weeds a little bit. What the very important part of this whole thing right now, that they are not yet represented by you, so therefore they need to be careful, Victor says. Yeah, confidentiality. Don't tell me any secrets yet, guys, because we haven't signed the hiring forms yet. That's next. If we decide to work together, let's do that. But right now, while we're just talking, and if it's the thing where they're interviewing you and 3 others, and they already told you, I'm not signing anything with anybody. Okay, I understand that. Respect. But before you hire any of us, don't tell any of us your secrets, just for your own good. I guarantee those other agents probably didn't say that to them in that way, and you'll score some points, some credibility points, because you're telling them something that you should, but that also protects them. So when I show you this, Mr. Seller, I'm not asking you to hire me yet. We'll decide later if we want to work together. Have you noticed that phrase I keep saying? I like that phrase. It's not required that you use that phrase, but it helps them understand. That's I think the rabbit trail I got off on and never came back. Those other sites have created with these multiple, when people put in their info and a bunch of agents call them back, they start feeling like they're just the princess at the prom and everybody wants to dance with them. And you don't even know if you like them yet, if they're safe for you yet, if they're a good match for you yet. You may not want to sign a commitment with them yet. You probably do. It'd take a lot for them to not want you to do that, but you still kind of want to feel them out a little bit and decide, is this person crazy? Are they going to do the things that I suggest that they do? Are they going to fight me every step of the way? Do I want to deal with that hassle? Are they wounded from a previous agent and I'm going to take the hit? Have you ever dated somebody that was just too soon? You're the rebound, and you're like, oh my gosh, why are they holding me hostage for all the things that jerk they chose to date did to them? That can be how it is. They start saying, well, the last agent did this to me. And you're like, I wasn't there. I don't even know that person. Don't abuse me because they abused you psychologically or whatever. But sometimes they do. And you might need to learn that and decide, you know what, too soon. I've got a line of 5 other people dying to help, to hire me to help them. And they're going to not, assume the worst from me. So let me just excuse myself. That's when you refer them to your least favorite agent in the business. Say, let me refer you to an agent who will pay me a referral fee. And in 6 months, when they've had to deal with you, they'll have to pay me a chunk of that check. That'd be pretty nice. But this is the first conversation. We're going to tour the property also. We're going to look for material disclosure, material facts that need to be disclosed, and talk about the positive features and what is fixture, what is personal property, what goes, what stays. We're going to talk about this too. Hey, seller, how much do you want to give to the other agents that will probably be the source of the buyer? I'm going to try really hard, Mrs. Seller, to bring a buyer for your house. But the fact of the matter is, I'm going to have a much better chance at the buyer coming from one of those other thousands and thousands of agents who subscribe to the MLS. And so what do you want to entice them with? What does the bait on that hook look like? Is it 2%, 3%, 2.5%, 3.5%, 4%? Is there a bonus? In markets where we're not like now, when it's a buyer's market, meaning more buyers than sellers more sellers than buyers, we're going to have to stand out more and try harder. The sellers are going to be the ones that are begging, please pick me. Please look at my property, not the 10 others on the market that are just like mine, priced less. Another way that a seller could get that buyer agent's attention is to say, hey, not only will I pay you 3%, but I'll give you $1,000 bonus. So any sort of compensation would be listed and figured out. What are we going to ask them? What are we going to offer to them? And then on the buyer's side, the buyer and the buyer agent's relationship is governed by this document called a buyer agent agreement. And in that agreement, it says right above the blue cloud here, firm shall seek the fee from a cooperating listing firm. This is the document that you and your buyer are signing. You got to tell your buyer, look, I'm probably going to get paid from the listing agent. Seller's paying their agent is sharing some of that with me. But if it's not enough to keep me happy, if I work for a higher amount than they're willing to pay, then I'm going to want the rest of it from you. That's the part of the explanation that got left out, I think, gets left out by a lot of agents. They don't want to have this conversation. It's not fun. It kind of brings the real world into the equation instead of, oh, let's go look at houses that we might want to live in and it's going to be fun. Wait, put on the brakes. Let me talk about the money real quick that you're going to have to maybe spend on me. And you've just kind of met them and you're worried, oh gosh, if I talk too much about this, they might just hire somebody else that doesn't talk enough about this. And that's true. They might. But you also need to be able to have these things on record, signed, so that if anything ever happened and you got investigated or in a disciplinary procedure, you could say, yes, I explained to them how this worked properly. And what's the worst case scenario when you don't explain how the money is routed properly? Oh, wait, we're there. People start thinking of ways to sue people over it. Welcome to the lawsuits. I think largely because we didn't explain this right. The phrase that too many agents use when they're talking about hire me to help you buy, hire me as your buyer agent, it's free to you. The seller's going to pay all my fee, and they stop there. They don't explain further. And so then something happens and oops, they picked a house where the listing agent is only, and the seller is only paying you $500 flat fee. And you're like, wait a minute. I've been showing them houses all day, every Saturday for the last 6 months, and they end up picking a house because of Murphy's Law, worst case thing. What can go wrong will go wrong. And now I'm only getting $500 or even 1% or whatever is an insultingly low amount. And you haven't told them. What you told them was, you don't have to pay me a dime. It's coming from the seller. But this particular seller is only paying you pennies. then what? That's a terrible time to clarify and say, oh, by the way, we were crunching numbers. We already looked at how much your closing costs would be for getting a loan for this house. We already looked at how much your down payment would be. And now, oh, by the way, this seller's not paying me enough. I want a few $1,000 from you on top of those other chunks. And especially if it's a buyer who scraped together and saved and did all they could to come up with that down payment. And now you're telling them they're going to pay more to buy this house. Wrong order. You should have explained it first before you embarked on this journey. Couple little vocabulary things. The success fee is the amount of commission. It's what you're getting paid at closing. It's the thing that you're getting paid after you've earned it probably a few days or a few weeks earlier. The success fee, that's the thing we're talking about when we say a buyer agency fee. 2.5%, 3%. A retainer fee would be an extra thing on top of that. And there it is up top. Firm acknowledges receipt of a non-refundable retainer fee. I can't even think of a time I've charged a retainer fee or seen someone else do so, but I've heard of agents who do. Once you get to the point as an agent where you kind of, I don't want to say own a market, but that's what you're trying to do when you see these postcards come in the mail and it's an agent and you're like, oh, there's another one. Oh, it's Christmas. Here's a holiday postcard. Oh, it's January, February. And they're farming that neighborhood. They're sending out postcards. They're maybe even knocking on doors. They want to be the agent people think of when they think Happy Valley subdivision, because they want to own that subdivision, be the most preeminent agent who gets hired for those houses, maybe because they live in it. And they've met so many people, or maybe they sold 4 or 5 of them and they're building on their success. Hey, I'm the one who sold the one down the street from you. Don't you want to hire me? So if they have that kind of reputation, they could get away with it and say, oh, by the way, I know you want to list with me because I'm the best. You've seen my postcards, right? You've seen all my signs in the yards driving around. I've got 10 of them right now. To work with me, this is how I work. It's a $500 retainer fee. Like an attorney charges a retainer fee if you want to have them start the work for you. It's an optional fee you could charge. May not get away with it, but you might. See what your BIC says about it. What do they want you to do? So the money flows this way. The seller's paying, in this case, on a $400,000 sale price, 6% commission, $24,000 total. If this listing firm finds the buyer themselves and no other firm is involved, then $24,000 is the number they're working with potentially. But if, as in most cases, they end up putting it out there, marketing it, and another firm comes along with the buyer, it's going to look like this. 12 on each side, potentially, if they've decided to do an even split. I'll give you 3 out of this 6. This could be an uneven split, as we've talked about multiple times. Here's another one. If it's an in-house sale instead of a co-broker sale, so co-broker means another firm is involved. Make that as a little side note. And that can be a hint for yourself. On the test question, if you see the term co-brokerage or co-brokered sale, you're going to think, well, dual agency is not possible in this test question because this is a 2-firm situation. The only way dual agency would be possible is this one, upper left, an in-house sales, same firm. So the firm is getting $24,000 and they're giving some of it to the agent in that same firm that helps the buyer and another chunk to the agent helping the seller. In-house versus brokerage. The actual agreements. I need to take my markings off of here, but I'm just going to leave it for now. Broker Betty is on a listing appointment with seller Sam. Sam tells Betty that the roof has leaked in the past and Sam had the leak repaired. Seller had the leak repaired. At an open house, a potential buyer asks Patty about any structural issues with the home. Broker Betty says there are no issues. Broker Betty may be found guilty of what? She's asked directly, are there any issues? They don't ask specifically about structural. Well, they do ask about structural, but Betty's response is there are no issues. Since they only asked about structural issues, can she hide behind that and say only answering that? Or does she have an obligation to disclose any issues that she knows about? She could say, no, there are no structural issues, but she needs to go ahead and talk about the any potential problems. Couple of things you could be tested on here. What kind of listing agreements are there? Now, this one is not one that we do in this market. North Carolina, I don't even think in the whole country, in the U.S., we do this. But definitely not in North Carolina. But an open listing agreement would be where the seller has the right to hire multiple firms to list their property, listing their property with more than one firm. So you could, and I think they do this over in the UK. You'll see this in England, multiple signs in a yard. The seller has hired 5 different companies. First one to bring a buyer that sticks gets paid. The others don't. I don't want to sell real estate there. That's too much work for potentially nothing, right? Glad we don't do that here, but you do need to know an open listing agreement means this. Seller can list with multiple firms, and the one bringing the buyer is the one who gets paid. And by the way, we're going to learn about 3 kinds of listing agreements. This is the first of those 3, and they are all about this third bullet point. That's probably the most testable part of these 3 types of listing agreements. The question is, what happens if the owner or the seller themselves brings the buyer? Do they have to pay a commission? And with this one, they do not. So not only are you competing with the other firms that they've hired, but you're competing with the seller themselves. If they bring the buyer by themselves, you could have done all this marketing and advertising and spent a bunch of money and then have them signed up with an open listing agreement like this. You're not going to get paid if the seller finds the buyer without you. Maybe it's somebody at their work and they just put up a flyer that they made on the bulletin board in the cafeteria or in the kitchen at work, and they found the buyer. You had nothing to do with it. If it's an open listing agreement, you're not getting paid. So by far the worst deal for you. Thank goodness we don't do that here. That leaves us with the other 2. An exclusive agency listing compared to an exclusive right to sell listing. Just look in the upper left corner for a second. Exclusive right to sell compared to exclusive agency. This one says that if a real estate agent or company is involved in the sale, then the seller has to pay the commission. But if the seller brings their own buyer without, like on their own, through their own efforts, somebody they knew from work, for instance, that you had no chance of knowing, then again, they don't have to pay you. They don't have to pay a commission. I don't want to do this one either. Again, because it's such front-loaded work. There's so much work we do up front with the listing. We do all that in the first few days. Then we just kind of set it loose to drift, hopefully with purpose, with various websites and ad campaigns and things. And it's just a product on the shelf. And you could be at the movies and get a note on your phone, a message on your phone that says, hey, showing requested of your new listing. And then you get another note that says, seller has confirmed the showing. And then you get another one because it's right now, an hour later, watching the same movie. Oh, they're done and they have sent an offer. You get an email notification that you have an offer on that new listing. And you were just watching a movie the whole time, right? That's the way to do it. Ideally, get a bunch of listings because then you can have a life and things sell without you being there. Sometimes, by the way, especially in a higher price point, it is common practice and expected that the seller wants you, their listing agent, to accompany all showings, even showings with other firms. And that's just its own thing. probably more of a price point thing. If you're in the luxury market, that might be more of a, imagine that. $3 million house in the MLS. Can any agent show it? Yes. But can that seller require a pre-approval letter, a proof of funds? Are they just going to let any old person come and look at it without proving that they're a potential buyer, or that they just want to come look at a $3 million house? The gate is probably going to be higher to see that house. And it might even involve, listing agent must accompany. So besides the fact of that, you could just be sitting there doing your thing, listing other properties, showing other properties, and get offers on the ones that you've already listed. So by far, that's the game plan. But with a market with this many agents in it, it's competitive because everybody wants this. This is the bread and butter, is the listings. Here's the one we do. This is the best one. Because even if the seller does find their own buyer at work, I keep using that as an example because some people drive an hour to work every day. And there is no chance in the world you would potentially have of finding and reaching out to that buyer that the seller found. Except for the internet, of course. But maybe it's some off-the-grid person who only found out about this house being for sale because they knew the seller themselves. And it definitely was not anything to do with you or your work or your ads or any of your efforts. Well, in this case, an exclusive right to sell listing, it doesn't matter. You still get paid. And that seller finds the buyer, firm still gets paid, regardless. In the beginning, explaining that to the seller might run into a few sellers that say, well, that's not fair. I want to have the right to try to sell it and not have to pay you. And occasionally they will say that to me, and they'll say, I've been talking to a cousin or a friend and they might want to still buy it. Do I have to pay you if they end up being the buyer? And I'm at a crossroads. I'm thinking, well, I get it. It's not really fair if they end up being the buyer, but I also don't want to do much work yet. If I might do a bunch of work for the first 3 days and then they end up selling it. So I'll probably try this with them and I'll say, well, I'll tell you what, they haven't bought it yet. Maybe they're not able to. Maybe they haven't been pre-approved. Let's go ahead and light a fire under them, so to speak, and say, look, you have 3 more days. If you go ahead and want to buy it, go ahead and do it now while we are still in this early stage. But once it goes on the market, you're going to have to pay a higher price because you're going to have to pay a commission. A commission will be involved. You could try that. I've done that. And a lot of times when they say I've got a person who might be interested, it never pans out. So put an expiration on it and tell them, look, this might get them off the fence. And if it doesn't, then I get to go ahead and work my magic and try to find other buyers. Wouldn't it be great if they did want to buy it, but we also had 3 others that wanted to buy it, and now they've got to compete with each other to get that price up even further. So usually that gets them, the seller, to give a reason. And you could even say, well, I'll do you one better. I'll call them for you. I'll take that off your to-do list because people don't like confrontation. They don't like negotiation. They like to brag about it, but most of them don't really like it. And that is our job. We don't really like it necessarily. I know plenty of agents that don't really like having to negotiate. And they're not good at it because they don't like it and they run from it. But that's the job. And so I would say, what's their number? Let me call them for you. And I'll tell them, look, good news. Going to be listing this property. I know that you have some interest in it. And the seller wanted me to let you know that we're putting this on the market Friday. Today's Wednesday. If you did want to go ahead and make an offer, then you can save on the commission and do it just between you and the seller if you do it before Friday. As of then, after then, you're going to have to run it through me, and then there will be a commission involved. And we're going to be listed at this price, not that price. So it might be a way to get them going. Exclusive right to sell by far benefits us the most because then we don't have to worry about the seller selling it and us not getting paid. So out of these 3, Which one is the most favorable to the agent? The exclusive right to sell. What's the difference between an exclusive right to sell listing and an exclusive agency listing? What's the biggest difference between the two? Yeah. In this one, you might not get paid. Exactly, Chara. Because the seller could still bring their own buyer, in which case you won't get paid. We want this one. Seller brings their own buyer, you had no chance. Because here's the way it really would work. Even if they did bring their own buyer, you're still going to have to do some work. If you've signed up this listing and they're bringing their own buyer, who's going to provide the forms? Does that buyer have a contract to use? Probably not. You're the resource for the disclosure. You're going to be the professional everybody looks to navigate this. And by the way, you could offer this as a fee for service option. You could say, look, if that person that you think might want to buy it, that's been telling you they might want to, goes ahead and buys it before we put it on the market, and you want to pay me $1,000, I will navigate it for you. I'll still negotiate for you. I'll help you through it. It saved me time because I didn't have to go, and money. I didn't have to go find the buyer, but you can get the benefit of my expertise and you're not just on your own. So that might be another solution. That might be the lowest tier if you did like a 3-tier system, by the way. 4% if you only use me for negotiation because you already have a buyer in mind. I'll give whatever percent, you pick it. So there it is. Big difference is which case does the seller owe a commission to the firm? The exclusive right to sell listing. The seller pays the firm regardless of who brings the buyer, even if it's the seller themselves. There is a document called the protection agreement. And think about this. Think about a for sale by owner. A protection agreement, a North Carolina protection agreement, is what you use when your buyer wants to buy a house that is listed not with an agent, but is being sold by the firm. By the seller themselves. Unrepresented seller, no listing firm. And it's the thing that protects your commission. It's the thing that you go out and get them to sign before you bring your buyer to see it. Hey, buyer. Oh, you want to see a for sale by owner listing? Great. What's the phone number? I'll call them for you. And on that phone call, without them near you, right, you're calling that seller directly. You're saying, hey, seller, I got a buyer who has some interest in your property. Will you pay me a buyer agency fee if we can work that out, provided the numbers make sense? As long as your bottom line is where it needs to be, you don't really care what I make, do you? Probably not. As long as the deal can go through and you get what you want. So you go out there because they say, yeah, I'll pay you. You're going to show them the working with real estate agents disclosure because you have to show that. Then you're also going to pull this thing out. It's another, you could call it the FSBO agreement, but it's properly called the Unrepresented Seller Disclosure and Fee Agreement. It protects your commission. It's the thing that seller signs that says, I'm not listing my house with you, but if your buyer buys my house, I'll pay you 3%, 2%, whatever that negotiated amount is. So it does not create an agency agreement between the seller and the buyer agent. It just has something in place for your commission to be covered. Here's that limited service situation we talked about. When it comes to limited service, here's the thing. Here's the testable part of that. The services are limited, but not the responsibilities of the agent. This is the case where an agent is saying, I'll only charge you 1% to myself and we'll give 2 or 3% to a buyer agent. And I'm able to charge you less because I'm doing less. I'm only putting it in the MLS. Not doing anything that I would normally do on a full service listing. But let's think about that. What if an agent markets themselves this way? I know an agent right now And every time he posts on Facebook, he says, look how much I'm saving for my sellers. $9,000 on this one. And it's because that's the strategy he's chosen to use. He is this kind of agent. What is he not doing that I am doing? Probably professional photos, probably certain advertising. You don't make money being a limited service broker without the numbers being up. It's a numbers game. You got to list a bunch because you're making less per. So you need to list 10 to maybe make the same that I'm making on one because I'm doing more than they are doing. So what if I'm in a transaction? Well, I was in a transaction as a buyer agent, and the seller had hired a limited service broker. And on the MLS sheet, it said, hey, this is a limited service listing. Contact the seller directly for any offers you want to make and any negotiating you want to do. Contact the seller directly to make an appointment to show it. Don't bother me with this, basically, because this is a limited service listing. So I did. I called the seller directly. They gave me the number and I said, hey, got a buyer potentially for your house. Can I come see it? And it was new construction. It was a small little custom builder guy. And he said, yeah, come on out. It's empty. It's got a box on it, a combination box, and went out there and looked. And he had agreed to pay a buyer agency fee. It wasn't a for sale by owner. He had listed it with a firm, but it was a limited service listing. And when it came time for inspections, because my buyer did like it, and we made an offer, and we negotiated that offer with that seller, instead of me calling the agent directly to say, hey, I got an offer, I called the seller directly. Said, I have an offer. Here it is. I'll email it to you. And we went back and forth and negotiated it. And at one point I said, well, here's the thing. It's limited service. I've got to deal with the seller directly. That means I have to explain things to the seller that normally I wouldn't have to, because he doesn't have an agent he does have an agent, but it's limited service. And his agent isn't right there explaining everything to him. So I had to explain the inspection process. And I said, look, my buyer's going to have an inspection. And this old dude said, oh, that's such a ripoff. Inspectors are just nonsense. It gets inspected all along the way of new construction by the city. They send out inspectors, and he's right. However, that's not a third-party home inspector. That is a required for city code, building code. Did you put in the electrical properly? Did you put in the plumbing properly? And I had to explain that to him. I wouldn't have had to do that on a full service listing because his listing agent would have explained all that. That's more time. Do I get paid more? No, probably not. And I didn't. And so he was very vocal about how it was ridiculous to have a third-party inspection and it was a ripoff. And I said, well, so be it. However, it is the buyer's right. When is a good time for them to send that person out? And we did. And it was a little single-story house. And when you went up in the attic, there was about a 4x8 sheet of plywood of floor space, storage space potential, and a water heater on the end. And if you went up there and just looked around, you would see all the normal stuff. You'd see the trusses, the lumber, the underside of the roof, the water heater, the white insulation stuff laying around on the floor that wasn't the floor that you're standing on. But if you went over to the water heater and stood up on your tiptoes and looked over it, like we did after the home inspector found this problem, we realized that 2/3 of the attic was not insulated. Only the part you could see on this side of the water heater. I can't even express to you how obscenely satisfied I was to call this old boy and say, oh, very passive aggressively, oh gosh, you know what? The inspector found out that half the attic is not insulated. And I'm sure that was just an oversight, and you'll get your guys out there to take care of that, won't you? What? Oh, well, yeah, gosh. And he had to backpedal so hard after he bragged about how ridiculous it was to have inspections. And it was all I could do not to just basically say, na, 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 boo, boo. Just rub it in. I had to keep it professional. But I really enjoyed telling him that news. And he did, to his credit, have the people back out there to do it, but that's why you have it inspected. And I wouldn't have had to explain any of that or do any of that if it had been a full service listing. But because it was limited service, you have a lot more involvement with the seller. Now, at one point along the way, the guy was so stubborn that I finally called his listing agent. I said, okay, look, Kirk, I know this is a limited service listing, but as you recall, you can limit your service, but you can't limit your responsibility. I'm going to need you to dial in and call this guy because he's kind of getting out of control. He's arguing about things that shouldn't be argued, that are standard procedure, and I need you to get him in check here for me. And he did. The agent did step in and say, because it was part of his responsibility. We have a responsibility as a listing agent to help our seller. Now, we can choose to let that seller kind of do their own thing to a point, but if it gets in the way of the transaction and the buyer's rights being infringed, then they need to step up. So I called him out, and he did it, to his credit. So that's the main thing that's testable with a limited service broker agreement. The services can be limited, but the agent's responsibilities are still expected to be followed. Seller pays the agent put in the MLS. Agent doesn't handle the showings or negotiations. Consumer's going to seek advice from a broker. And if you're the only broker talking to the seller, that person's going to be you to guide him through. So you're going to have to do more, just like you would have to do more in a for sale by owner situation. You're going to have to do more in a limited service situation. Why? Because it helps your buyer accomplish their goals of buying this house. Do I get paid more? Probably not. That's not fair. Welcome to real estate. Go get another one. This one is more work, but the next one might be less work. It's a numbers game. You could try to charge them more, and it's all going to be a negotiation thing. But if they say no, are you going to walk away from it? Are you going to discourage your buyer from buying it? You could certainly tell them. You would want to be careful about that. You don't want to discourage them from buying it because it helps you. You might discourage them from buying it because it's not the best choice for them, because maybe it's overpriced, or maybe it's some other negative about the property that they need to seriously consider and maybe walk away from over. The main thing here is, what if that old seller guy liked me a lot? I don't owe him anything. I am a buyer agent only. And what if he already knew me or liked me or saw my ads and just thought, hey, we're just kind of from the same area, and you and me are kind of similar and we have a lot in common. As much as he might like me, I have to be careful. Oops. Wow. Boy, that was just a complete flub. Let me find that spot. Much as he might like me, I have to be careful not to be a dual agent or make him think I am one. There we are. It's like I was driving you in my car and all of a sudden I opened the door and you fell out. Sorry about that. So cannot create undisclosed dual agency. Got to make sure they understand that you're looking out for your buyer only. Don't tell me anything that you don't want my buyer to know, because telling me is telling them. But we're so darn irresistible and nice and helpful that sometimes they like us and they feel like we're there to protect them, but we're not. We have to make sure we keep that on track and very upfront. We'll come back from break. We'll talk about the MLS. See you back here in 10. Let's come on back together. All right. We know about the MLS at this point. It's cooperation among brokers. It's the thing that gives us resources to see what other things have sold for. It shows us that we can sell other brokers' properties and get protected. We know how much we're going to make, that the seller is setting aside to pay us. And we might have done that. Let's take a look. So if you're my buyer, one of the things I'm going to do at some point is go through the MLS with you. I'll send you listings from it. If we get together in person or on a Zoom call or something, I'll say, hey, let's do a little search online, see what's out there, because just sending them listings is one thing, but a lot of times they don't understand how best to pick houses. They get too picky. They start weeding things out that might actually be a good choice. So it's not a bad idea to go through this together and show them kind of how to analyze and look at these properties. So picking my favorite go-to neighborhood, Highland Creek, if we go down through here and go to the bottom of each one, there's Consuelo again. I think we might have seen one with her. 2.5% commission on that one, 2.5% on this one, 3% for this one. They're paying the buyer agent 3%. So the way the MLS works, it's showing us how much the seller's willing to pay us. And if we go down here and see a 2.5 like this, and we're like, nope, I do it for 3%, not 2.5. So I'm going to explain to my buyer, hey, buyer, remember that conversation we had where if the seller doesn't pay me my fee, then you'll make up the difference? Well, good news. They're paying me almost all of it. They're paying me 2.5%, but my fee for helping buyers is 3%. So I'm going to need you to cover the other 0.5%. That could be a conversation you have. Or you might say, you know what, close enough. I'll take it. Let's just move on with life. And it's a numbers game anyway. But sometimes you might get to a point. I've seen a lot of 2.5s. You might get to the point where it is actually less than you're willing to take. We're going to go backwards now, start at the end. Yeah, I'm seeing 2.5 and 3. It's so easy for the consumer to see this. Oh, there's a 2. And think, yep, the standard is 3, 2.5 or 3. But here's one where that might just be a little too little for your comfort level or your firm. Firm might say, no, we don't do that here. You got to be making at least 2.5% buyer agent commission. So there's different reasons. It's a negotiable thing. There's another 2.5. There's another 2.5. So it would be so easy to now say, oh yeah, the standard commission is 2.5. Don't say it. Resist the urge. Even if we're seeing a bunch of them, and by far we're seeing a ton of 2.5 and 3s. We saw 1, 2. One that's 2%. And if we kept looking in other neighborhoods, because I think we've seen them all in Highland Creek just now, we would probably find a few that were really low for your comfort level. So that's what the MLS is about. The member firms, not everybody has access to the MLS, only the ones who subscribe to it. Sorry, 1 second. So who's going to subscribe to the MLS? I'm here in the Charlotte market, which covers about a 50-mile radius, including Concord, including Gaston County and Iredell, and even as far north as North Wilkesboro. And for whatever reason, I still don't know the reason, but they signed some sort of an agreement with Asheville, and you could have Asheville listings in our MLS. We could do a search. But if I wanted to look at Raleigh MLS, I'm not going to see Raleigh listings in my MLS. It's too far away. There's a Raleigh MLS for that covers that probably 50-mile radius or so. And so if we march across the state of North Carolina, I think we'll probably find about 13 or so different MLSs. And so what if you work in a couple of different markets? Some people are at the beach 3-4 months out of the year. Then they can just subscribe to that MLS too. It's going to cost more. And instead of paying only, what is it? I think it's like $200 a quarter to join and to belong to my MLS. You have to pay a prorated amount to join, and then you pay a regular quarterly amount. You'll just be paying another one to join what? You could join all of them if you want to, because your real estate license covers the whole state. It's the only way to see the MLS listings. But in this day and age, most of the MLS gets disseminated out to all of those other Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com. It's the only way to see that the stuff in the MLS is to belong to the MLS. And some agents that are active in multiple markets do. And depending on where you are, some agents that are near the border of, say, North Carolina and Virginia are not only having to have a North Carolina license and an MLS of whatever that town area is, but also a Virginia license and whatever MLS that side of the line requires. So it could be lots of things. The Charlotte MLS includes Fort Mill, Rock Hill, and some amount of mileage across the line. So I could look up South Carolina homes for sale, but I can't show them because I don't have a South Carolina license. To get a South Carolina license, there's a different test. And I've heard that if you did well enough on your North Carolina test, you might be able to completely botch and get wrong the South Carolina portion of the test and still pass it. Don't do it because don't count on getting 100% right of the North Carolina related stuff. But, yeah, good question. LeVar says, does the lawsuit, include requirements to belong to the MLS? And the thing about the lawsuit with the MLS is having the seller pay the buyer agent commission. That's one of the things that they want to change, is that the seller pays the buyer agent directly instead of paying their agent, who then pays the buyer agent. They want the seller to pay their own agent. And if they do make commission available to a buyer agent, which they're really going to have to, because why are they going to show the listings if they're not getting paid, right? But it's just really going to be a routing of the money situation, I think. And it'll just be more of a semantics kind of a thing. What is it about the MLS that is so darn irresistible? Get rid of that alert. Exposure, right? Getting all those people seeing that property, getting access, letting people see what you have to offer there, as well as the data, the data for helping to figure out what something's worth, what things have sold, not sold, what things are coming soon. Have you seen that category, coming soon, out there? Do you know what that is? Coming soon is a pretty new feature of the last couple of years, and it gives us a way to go ahead and put the listing in the MLS. But a very important part of it is that we cannot allow any showings yet. So if you put a listing in as coming soon, then let's see if it might actually have a note in here. If it ends up getting shown, then the listing agent, at least in my MLS, can be fined $1,000 for letting it be shown whilst only in coming soon status. There are 10 coming soon status listings in Concord right now. Let's take a look at them. So this one in Laurel Park, you can see it's got a CS instead of an active right there. Status is CS for coming soon. And if we go down to the paragraph, it says maybe nothing. Yeah, they don't really tell us anything. What they are going to tell us is that it's going to become active on December 1st. It's currently coming soon, but in another couple of days, it's going to become active. That's when you can go look at it. But here's the good part about coming soon. It gives people time to fall in love with it and say, oh, let me go ahead and set an appointment now and be one of the first ones to see it on December 1st. It gives people sort of motivation. And my favorite thing to do is use coming soon status so that we have a whole line of people looking at it on day one. And I want people to look at other people looking at it. I want buyers in line waiting their turn while other buyers are looking at it, because that makes them worry that the ones ahead of them are going to buy it. Drives that interest up, hopefully the price up, because I'm representing the seller. And that's exactly what happened a lot in the last couple of years. Not so much anymore. They make a note here about it. They're saying professional photos on the 29th, showings beginning on the 1st. And ways to submit the offer. Oh, look at the fake sky. That's a professional photo, and they had a fake sky put in. That's a thing. So a lot of times they'll remind people, and you have to instruct your sellers, hey, seller, if an agent calls you or knocks on the door, don't let him in. Do not let this be shown, because it could cost me $1,000 fine or whatever your MLS fines people who allow it. Why? Why fine somebody? Because it's unfair to let some people see it but not others. So during the coming soon phase, if you're using that, oh wow, look at their remarks section. That's great. That means it's not great. Let's do better. Then you've given that one that you let show it an unfair advantage over all the others. Here's the other interesting part about coming soon. While nobody can see it yet, they can still make an offer on it. Are you a buyer out there? Would you be comfortable as a buyer making an offer sight unseen? Didn't get to walk through it. Some did. Some do. Because it might be the only way that you get to make an offer. But that's just the ins and outs of coming soon, and that's one of the things that we learn in the MLS. Is what is that status? Active, obviously ready to go look at. It's on the market. Under contract, show versus no show means, will the seller allow it to still be shown or not? It's under contract. Why would you want to let your house still be shown even though it's under contract? Why still let it be shown? It's under contract. What's the point? Aren't you wasting everybody's time? You got it. Deborah says it's nothing until it's a thing. Nothing's guaranteed. It could fall through. It happens all the time. In fact, the buyer could walk away for any reason or no reason. We'll learn in a few minutes or maybe tomorrow when we get into the contract stuff. Because during that due diligence period of time that I've mentioned to you before, the buyer can back out for any reason or no reason. And all they're losing is the due diligence money. And they can still back out after the due diligence period is over, but now they're going to lose the earnest money too. At no point does the buyer get forced to buy the house and close on it. It's just a matter of how much money are they willing to walk away from if they choose not to buy it. And so you might have a seller that says, look, keep on letting it be shown, because let's get maybe some backup offers in place, because until the inspections happen and we've seen how many items they want me to repair, I may not want to fix stuff, and they might walk away over it, and I don't want to lose my momentum. They're probably going to lose a little momentum because some people aren't going to show it because it's under contract, even if they're allowed to show it. But that's what the difference is. And then once, usually that no-show kicks in when the repairs are negotiated and everything's looking really solid. No real reason for this to fall through. The buyer could walk, of course, but looking pretty solid. Closed means exactly that. It actually closed. So that's the one that the appraiser really pays a lot of attention to, and we as well, because that proves what people were willing to pay for houses. We want to see the closed ones. Expireds, these three at the bottom, are good for potential listings, for us as agents to pick up potential listings. Because if it expired, that means it failed to sell. And that means you could reach out to that seller potentially, as long as they're not on the do not call list, and say, hey, seller, I see that you didn't manage to get your house sold, but you tried. Are you still interested? Let me show you what I can do. Do you think sellers get calls from agents the day it expires, like all day long and for the following week? Yeah. Their agents are fighting over them. Agents are calling and calling and calling, because that's a way that a lot of agents get business. Temporarily off the market might be because they need to take a break for some reason. Maybe they need to get some major repair done, or they just have a lifestyle situation that's causing them to not be able to let it be shown. And then withdrawn means it didn't expire. It's still before the expiration date, but for some reason they needed to just stop. And that would be, whose permission would need to be given in order to withdraw a listing from the MLS? Somebody wanted to pull it off the market, including withdraw it from the MLS. Definitely the seller, but who else? Yeah, that's the firm's decision. If they want to withdraw it from the market because they want out of the listing agreement, that firm's going to have to, it's going to be for the firm to decide to mutually agree. And they could choose not to. The firm could say, nope, sorry, you signed on for 6 months. We're in month 4. We're not taking it off the market for 2 more months. Well, it doesn't mean the seller's forced to show it or accept an offer. So you're kind of working against yourself. But point is, they can't just demand that you take it off and then you take it off. They can ask, hey, can we take it off the market? And you're going to have to go to your BIC and say, hey, BIC, here's the situation. Would you let them out of the listing agreement? And it's a bilateral agreement. So both would have to be on the same page. We've seen a few of these data sheets. Who's responsible for what goes into the MLS listing? Whose responsibility is it? Yeah, us. Us and our firm, but mostly us, because we're the ones who put it in or hire the person to put the information in there. And it's a lot of information. It's a lot of detail there, much more than you get in the tax record. All the ins and outs. That's why people sometimes don't have any intention of listing houses for other people. They just want access to this data so they can see what values are and value property for their own investing. Listing contracts. We talked about this point at first substantial contact means what's the topics that are being mentioned that you need to put on the brakes and say, wait, before we go forward, let me talk to you about this document. It lets you know not to tell me any of your secrets because you're starting to tell me about your money or your motivation. Perfect. How much they were pre-approved for. Hey, I went ahead and talked to a lender and I got pre-approved. Wait, let me protect you from yourself. Don't tell me anything until we've agreed to work together. And it may not be a big deal. They might be, well, you're here for that. You're here on a listing appointment. I'm going to list with you because your cousin told me that you're the best and I believe your cousin and we're going to do that. So that could be all it is. No big deal. But you definitely want to not let them talk about stuff that might jeopardize their confidentiality. And in this disclosure, you're telling them about how dual agency works. And on this disclosure, You are telling them if you are open to it. They're not giving you permission on this one. They give you permission on the agency agreement that hires you. But on this one, you're telling them whether you're even willing to do dual agency or designated dual agency. And here's what that listing agreement looks like. I think I have that here to point out that listing firm, is the name you put at the top of the first page, because it's between the client and your firm, not the client and you. You sign the last page on behalf of your firm because you're a general agent on behalf of your firm, and you have the authority to sign some things, agency agreements, on their behalf. But it is not your name in this line. It is the firm ABC Realty that you work for that this listing agreement is between. What has to be in that listing agreement? The names, that makes sense. The terms you agreeing to, the legal description we talked about. It also has the street address, but it definitely has to have a legal description in there as well. We want to make sure that we're listing the right property. And it can be confusing sometimes. Let's make sure that we have the right lot in the right block. 15, not 14. Listing price, what are you going to list it for? Brokerage fee, how much are the brokers getting? A protection clause. Let's stop for a second there. A protection clause. We've seen the word protection in the last 30 minutes. We saw something called a protection agreement before the break. But that was about working with a for sale by owner. You get a protection agreement with the for sale by owner so that it acknowledges that for sale by owner seller is going to pay you a buyer agency fee. But this is different. A protection clause is an item in the listing agreement that says this. Let me show it to you. It says, there it is. If you, for some reason, don't sell this property, and you agree to let them out of the listing agreement, here we go. It's this one. It's on the bottom of page 3 of the listing agreement. If the circumstances set out above have not occurred, meaning you haven't sold it, and if within blank days after it expires, that's it. If the listing agreement has expired, the seller ends up selling it to somebody that came along back when you had it listed, that you're still entitled to the commission. That's the protection clause. Why is this useful? What if they end up selling it to somebody you showed it to yesterday and today it expired? Is that fair to you? Not so much. It was your work that introduced them to this buyer, and within fill in the blank days, I usually put a big fat number in there. I put 30 in there once upon a time, and somebody tried to negotiate me down from that, and I'm like, never again. So now I usually just write 180 or 120 or something huge. Nobody has ever questioned it ever since, and they probably never will. But I explain it, but I put a big number in there. Now, here's the thing, though. This just protects you from them selling it to somebody and going around the commission. But the minute a valid listing agreement is entered into between them and another firm, this doesn't protect you anymore. This only keeps them from going around you, and it's somebody that came as the result of your efforts. But the minute they relist with another firm after it expires, they could still sell it to somebody that looked at it with you while you had it, and they don't owe you anything. So again, protects them. There it is. The protection period, the protection clause. That's what this is called. And then here's the other part. Fee deemed earned upon procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer. So it's been earned. It's not been given. It's not going to be given until closing day, the settlement, and the deed's recorded. So now the money can change hands, but earned either when a ready, willing, and able buyer has been procured, The property is sold during the term of this agreement. And then if somebody buys it who came as a result of your efforts, as long as the seller has not relisted with someone else. There we go. So that's the protection clause. And then sharing commission with other firms is going to be spelled out in that listing agreement as well. You're charging me 6%, but then flip the page. I'm going to give 3% to the buyer agent. Let me show you that because it's in 2 different locations. I would say for homework this week, look through this listing agreement. Look it up in the forms of your Google Drive. But you'll see the total commission is referenced here, bottom of page 3. But that just says how much the total is. If we have to keep going to the next page, and then we can see if the seller chooses to cooperate with sub-agents to the seller, then check this box, and that sub-agent will make this amount of money or this percentage of the gross sale price. But maybe they won't offer any of it, and I counsel my sellers don't. We don't check this box at all because we don't want to work with only sub-agents. We only want to work with buyer agents because there's some liability involved when it's sub-agents. If something goes wrong, if you didn't submit square footage properly, then they're coming straight to us, me and you, Ms. Seller. We want them to make a pit stop at their buyer agent and blame them a little bit too. Because if they use a buyer agent, then that person has some more responsibility than if only they're a sub-agent. So I'm only going to check this box, but it's talk to your BIC, see what they want to do, see what they want you to do. And so I'll just say, yep, I'm paying you 2.5, 3, 2, whatever, but you got to be a buyer agent. Buyer agents only. How do brokerage fees work? It's typically a percentage of the sale price. The gross sale price times a percentage. In new construction, you might see the builder say, okay, we'll pay you a percentage, but it's not going to be of the final sale price because we've added $100,000 in options and upgrades, and we don't want to pay you a commission on all of that. So quite often the builder will say your commission will be based on the base price. And that's one I did recently. So it ended up being a $750,000 sale price, but the base price was $668. And so the commission they paid me was based on the $668 because they can, right? And I knew this from the first day and whatever. So they just, everything's negotiable, just the way it is. Whatever it is, the most common way is a percentage of the sale price. If it's a $100,000 house at 5% commission, the total commission is $5,000. This doesn't tell us the whole story. It doesn't tell us what if it's a shared co-brokerage, another firm bringing the buyer situation. How much are you getting then? That's when we'll see what percent goes to each side. It could also be this in those kinds of limited service arrangements that we've talked about. They could charge a percent, but they could also just charge a flat fee. For $500, I'll put you in the MLS, or $1,000, put you in the MLS. Oh, you want professional photos? Well, that's going to be another couple $100. You want drone shots? It's going to be another couple $100. You want whatever, layer it on. It's like fee for service, a la carte, pick the choices on the menu kind of a thing. This is another option. Although this one, the real estate commission doesn't like because there's potential for shenanigans with this one. It's called a net fee. And the firm, the seller's telling you, look, I don't care how much you sell it for. I just need $100,000. If you can get $300,000 out of it, you can keep anything over $100,000. They probably aren't going to be cool with that in real life. They're just saying that because they know it's not going to sell for that much. It'd probably be more like they say, hey, if you can get 130 out of it and get me 100,000, you can keep the 30. You're keeping the net over the minimum amount the seller wants. The problem is Did the agent give good advice on what it's worth? Or did they downplay it? Did they say, hey, this is only worth $105,000. So if you need 100 and I'm going to get 5, great. We're both happy. All the while knowing it's really worth 125. And they're probably going to get till they sign the bottom line. Oh, oops, sorry, I was off. Guess I'm getting 25,000. That's what the commission wants to make sure doesn't happen. So not ideal. And most of the time it's going to be a percentage of the sale price. What are our duties as a firm? Advertise and promotion. Obviously, we're going to brag about our marketing plan. Showings, handling showings. In our market, we have a showing appointment desk that handles the scheduling of appointments. And then if it's our own buyer, we'll do the showing, or whatever agent's bringing the buyer, they'll do the showing. Advising the seller along the way. Some sellers need more hand-holding than others. Negotiate price, negotiating terms and repairs. That's a whole other thing. Negotiating that upfront initial offer price, get that squared away. Now we're under contract. Now the buyer's going to have inspections. And then the result of those inspection reports are going to be a whole other set of negotiating. Hey, yeah, I was willing to pay $348, but that was before I knew the roof needed to be replaced. Now I want a new roof. Oh, okay. I'm going to walk away from this transaction, this deal, if I don't get a new roof. Okay, well, are you willing to walk away from $10,000 due diligence money that you put down that's non-refundable? That's the big question in the negotiating. How much do we really think they're willing to walk away from? And that's why in the first set of negotiating the price and terms, you get as much of a non-refundable due diligence chunk of money that you can. It locks in the likelihood of them walking over repairs a little better. I think I might have told you the craziest story of non-refundable due diligence money I've ever heard in an actual North Carolina CE class was $400,000. Non-refundable due diligence money, meaning the buyer's saying, I'm really going to buy this house. I'll give you $400,000 on day one of being under contract. Non-refundable. Seller can spend it. Yes, they can pay off the mortgage if they want to. They can go buy another house if they want to, and a car to go with it. And my next question, when that agent put that in the chat, when I asked it, hey, how much was the price? Fully expecting like $2 million. It had to be a big price. The price was $400,000. $400,000 non-refundable due diligence money deposit on a $400,000 purchase price. That's a buyer who really was tired of losing offers. I'll bet that buyer had lost 10 in a row and they were exhausted making offers that didn't get accepted. And they said, I'm winning this one, darn it. And they did. Yeah. Aggressive buyer for sure. It's also a seller, to make my point here, who is probably not going to have to fix anything. Because if I'm that seller, I'm saying, please leave. I hope you walk away because I'm going to go collect another due diligence fee. Please walk away from this $400,000. They're not walking away, are they? And so that seller is probably going to, what we call in the good old South, hunker down and just say, hey, yeah, it needs a roof. It's got radon. It's got radon infested mice infestation. It's got everything. I'm not fixing any of it. That's your problem. I'm spending your money right now because it's my money. Please walk away. So giving them advice along the way, right? Helping them figure out negotiating both upfront price, but repairs later. And then our upfront, our main responsibility as a broker is always disclose. So disclosing everything to everybody, the material facts. All agency agreements need to tell the whole world, look, and the people involved in the transaction, we're not going to be unfair to people just because they're in a certain group. The protected classes should not have anything to do with how fair someone's treated in real estate. We'll talk about protected classes in Chapter 19. What are the seller's duties? Keep up their side of the deal, which is allow showings. Sometimes I have a seller and they turn down showings. I get a notification on my phone, requested showing, FYI, and I'm just waiting. Within a few minutes, if I don't see confirmed by seller, I'm calling my seller. Hey, what's going on? Can I do something to help allow this showing? Oh, well, it's just inconvenient. We really wanted to sleep in. That's 9:30, but we like to sleep in till 10. Um, you see, we talked about this. This is the first showing request or whatever, right? And, I don't get real fussy right away, but I do get kind of firm. And I'm like, is there something I can do to allow this showing? Because remember, we need to allow all showings we possibly can. It better be a darn good reason. You're not there and you got to put the dog up. Okay, I'll go get bit by the dog if we can keep the showing. No problem. Let's keep the showings. Impress upon them these things up front so that they know what to expect. And don't let a seller get in the habit of just picking and choosing every other showing they allow. That's not fair to you and your efforts and time and money you put in. So allowing showings, keeping the property presentable. Sometimes people say, yeah, I'll do everything you say. But then you get feedback from the showing that the underwear was laying on the bed, the dirty laundry, the trash, all the things you told them they need to do. As I tell them, look, here's your little fire alarm procedure when you have a showing request. Turn on all the lights, open all the blinds, put away the things you don't want people to see, safety things and ugly things, guns, sharp things. Let's get them locked away somewhere. Jewelry, because I'm not there. I can't control every single thing. There might be kids there too. I listed a house of she was both an EMT and a cop. No, she was fire and a cop. And so she had like 14 guns laying around the house in little nooks and hidden away. But I'm like, she said, well, there's one right behind you. And I'm like, oh, that's a box. Yeah, but there's one in there and there's one over there. I'm like, okay, let's figure out the arsenal logistics and lock them up. I'm all for protection, but let's not have something there that the little kid that we have no control over. I guarantee after the first couple of houses that a buyer looks at when they have kids with them, the kids go straight upstairs while the parents are still looking downstairs. Once they get comfortable after that first one or two, they are not staying together. That's all we can be sure of. We can ask them to. You can watch them on video because everybody's got Ring or something in their house. You can watch them legally, but you can't listen to them. You can't listen. I mean, how are we going to know? That's a different topic that you're not tested on. But it is legal for them to look, but it's not legal for them to listen. So we could see that somebody misbehaved. And by the way, last year, let me think. One of them was at first it was just like, wow, crazy. But then the more you think about it, it was just sad. But an agent got disciplined from the real estate commission because she got caught on camera waiting for her buyer to show up. She broke into the liquor cabinet, not broke in, but she took a swig. She drank from the liquor cabinet waiting for the buyer to show up. And while at first I laughed too, I'm like, oh, that's crazy. But then it's like, she's got to know better. And maybe that means that she was more of a literal alcoholic. Maybe she was such an indentured servant to an addiction that she couldn't help herself. And that kind of was like, ugh. But this day and age, they're always looking. There's always a camera. Don't do anything. It's all right there. She got busted. Somebody else, I forgot exactly the details, but another camera situation. Yeah, you got it. Trying to get the party started early. Catching up in the chat. And hey, whatever works. But, it said in the details of the case, she replaced the bottle of liquor, but they still complained to the commission. So, yeah, you don't know. And I've heard of even worse things and gross things that go on sometimes too. There are cameras, people. During COVID, I had a buyer who, as we walked up the sidewalk, they said, should we put on our masks? And that's a big deal because some people had compromised immunity issues and some people just have views and personal issues. And I said, whatever it is, they've got a Ring doorbell. I didn't see we did see a lot of verbiage in the listing and showing instructions back then. Please wear masks, please wear booties and blah, 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 whatever. But they didn't. But because I saw that camera as we were walking up, I said, let's just mask up. because I don't want their personal feelings about masks or no mask, even though they don't have instructions, getting in the way of them not picking you because they were mad at you because you didn't wear a mask and they thought you should. You know, you just gotta read the room, be careful. That actually ended up being the house that they bought. So don't want to do anything to start us off on the wrong foot, because they very might quite possibly are looking. They might be next door, looking at the camera. Provide necessary documents, cooperate with agents, pay commission that's agreed upon. All those are what we're expecting from the seller. And in that listing agreement, we're going to have various provisions. The crazy light bulbs there, that's about fixtures. What fixtures stay? Chandeliers, anything that's a fixture versus personal property. What happens with earnest money? We'll learn about earnest money next chapter, but that's the other thing. Since we're so close, let me mention it here. We've got the due diligence money, and that is non-refundable. But then we have earnest money, and that potentially is refundable. I say potentially because it depends on the timeline. And if here is our timeline, and we've got this moment of becoming under contract right here, and we're all shooting for the closing day down here, then we've got this date somewhere in the way of a due diligence deadline. Then the difference between earnest money and due diligence money is about the dates. The due diligence gets given to the seller on day one of it being under contract. And anytime they back out during this due diligence period, they're supposed to get their earnest money back returned to them. Are they going to get their due diligence money back if they back out during the due diligence period? No. They lost it on day one. It's non-refundable. Even if it doesn't appraise, So let's say the appraisal happens and the purchase price is $400,000, but it only appraises for $390,000. If the seller won't come down to the $390,000 with the purchase price, the buyer might want to walk away. But if they do walk away, they're walking away from the due diligence money, even over this appraisal issue. And then if the seller won't fix the leaky roof and the buyer says, well, I don't want to put in a new roof as soon as I buy this new house, I'm walking away, same thing. Okay, you can walk away, but you're walking away from the due diligence money too. Once we get into this phase, the after due diligence period phase, all the way to closing, then the earnest money is also going to go to the seller. That's not coming back to the buyer if they choose to walk away. So we need to explain that to them. What if they walk away right here, still in the due diligence period, when the buyer has the right to get their earnest money back because they chose to walk away before the due diligence deadline? Well, here's the thing about that. Even though it's spelled out very particularly in the contract that that's what should happen, we as a broker holding that money in our firm's trust account, we can't give it to our favorite person. We can't let it come out of a trust account until we get it in writing if they disagree, even though it's very clearly spelled out that the buyer should get it back because they're backing out in this point in time. We got to hold on to it if the two parties don't agree about that earnest money, that earnest money going to one versus the other one. So we explain that in the listing agreement. We say, here's how earnest money works. If you guys don't agree, if the deal falls apart, then I've got to just leave it alone and leave it there until you do agree. And if you never agree that one gets it and one doesn't, or you split it between you, 50-50 maybe, if you never come to an agreement in writing, I can't give it to either one of you. I'm going to pass it on over, or my BIC will, the custodian of the trust account, will hand it off to the clerk of court in the county the property is located in, and they will deal with it. So that's what you're explaining with this earnest money provision. Great question. Are due diligence offers in the offers still pretty high? They are higher than they were originally, but they're nowhere near what they were a year or two ago. So they had gotten up into the 10, 20, 50, 100,000 range quite frequently, but now they're back into the 5 to 10,000 range. I saw one, it was a cash buyer on one of my listings last month, and they tried $1,500 on due diligence and $2,500 on earnest money, and the seller was like, no way, way too little. So we really renegotiated and ended up going with, let me think, it was, I think, 4,000 in due diligence and 10,000 in earnest money. And I think that's a little more what we're seeing. But it's really going to depend on how competitive the property is, how much people are wanting it. We'll talk about dual agency in that listing agreement because, again, it's an agency agreement. We need to let them know how that works and then also decide, are we going to make it available? Are we willing to be a dual agent? We could just have them check the box acknowledging, I don't do that. I don't want to be a dual agent, or my firm won't let me. Because I also ask these agents in the CE classes, hey, here in this class right now, you 80 people, either because you don't want to or because your firm won't let you, who here does not do dual agency? And most of them don't. I'd say 60 to 80% of them say, nope. Either because they tried it one time and it went terribly wrong and people got mad and threatened maybe to turn them in, or because they took better care of one side than the other they were accused of. It just depends. Material facts, we'll explain to them what that is. Provisions like seller paying for a warranty. It might be a good idea on an older house that we say, hey, seller, let's go ahead and give them a 1-year home buyer's warranty to help them feel better about the fact that all your stuff is old. Your water heater, your heating and air system, your roof, it all has age on it. At least they'll know the first year they're covered for most items. Pre-inspections. Hey, seller, let's go ahead and get it inspected ourselves at your expense so that we can see what's wrong with it and fix it before a buyer's looking over our shoulder. Because if we can fix it while a buyer's not in the picture, then we can choose to fix it for cheaper, frankly. And it might be what I call a Chevrolet fix instead of a Cadillac fix, or a Toyota fix instead of a Lexus fix, right? Still fixed properly, but the buyer's going to want better than the seller's willing to do. Let's go ahead and do it before the buyer's here yet, and then put it on the market. And then the fixtures versus personal property issues. Tell me this, is square feet, the measurement of how big the house is that a material fact as per the Real Estate Commission? Do you think the Real Estate Commission says that you have to disclose square feet as a material fact? Great. Great answer. Square footage is sort of a hot topic across the country. Some markets require it, and some don't. So the Real Estate Commission of North Carolina says you don't have to give square feet. That is not a required material fact. But if you do choose to give the square footage of a house, you better be accurate. That's the main thing. But just because the Real Estate Commission doesn't require it doesn't mean that it's not required of us, because we have multiple entities that we have to answer to. We answer to the Real Estate Commission, we answer to the Realtor Association, and we also answer to the Multiple Listing Service. And the Multiple Listing Service says put in the square feet. And since they require you to put in square feet when you list houses in the MLS, then it better be accurate. So the testable question is that, does the Real Estate Commission require square footage? No, they do not. But if you do put it in for whatever reason, and mostly that reason is because the MLS requires it, then the commission says, well, then be sure you get it good, get it right. Make sure it's accurate, measure it properly. The square footage is broken down into a couple of different things, heated and non-heated. We'll talk about that when we come back. I'll see you back here in 10. oh, is square footage a material fact? It is not. But if you do report it, it better be accurate. And it involves a couple important points. We need to be good at it. Even if we don't measure it, can the listing broker choose not to measure the square feet? Can we as a listing broker find another way to get that square footage reported? Oops, sorry. I knew it. I mute it because in case I'm watching something, I don't want you guys to have to listen to whatever crazy thing I might watch. But I always forget. Can the listing agent be the does the listing agent have to measure it themselves? That's my question. With square footage. Does it have to be the listing agent? No, we can hire it out. We could hire a professional house measurer, hopefully an appraiser, like maybe a retired appraiser or an existing appraiser who has measured a few million houses and is really good at it. Because if I'm paying somebody money to measure instead of doing it myself, I'm going to make sure they're good at it, better than me. I hired it out a couple years ago, and it was just a little townhouse, and I measured it myself, but I also hired it out. And no offense, and the guy did a fine job. He didn't do bad, but it was a very simple house too. He should have done a good job, and he did. But he was only 2 years into the real estate business. He had a license for 2 years. You don't need to have a license to be a measurer. He just happened to be doing it as a side income because he didn't have enough sales yet he needed to do extra things, right? And that's fine. And again, they trained him on how to measure it. But here's the thing. If he's been a licensed part-time agent for 2 years, I'm not calling him when it's a big house, a big complicated house. I was kind of thinking if you hire it out, it's always going to be somebody with a lot of experience. Fair warning, it's not. So if you're ever out there and when you're brand new, you should hire it out because you're still learning. I would do this. I'd still measure it myself, but then I'd hire somebody to do it. It might be like between $100 and $200, maybe $150. And they'll not only measure it, but write it up, draw it up on a nice, pretty floor plan, and give you something to include in your marketing and to hand out to potential buyers. So it's a good thing to do. And you can also kind of see, oh, what did they do versus what did I do? How did they come up with the number? For your purposes in this class, we need to learn a few things about measuring. And one of those things is we have to differentiate between square footage that is unheated versus heated. We have to specifically spell out, this is HLA, heated living area. And then this other part, most commonly in the garage, by the way, is unheated square footage. So anytime you see HLA out there on a Zillow listing or something, 1,800 feet HLA, that does not include the garage. It's the livable part. And there's some other things too. It is the exterior measurements. So if it's just like a rectangular shaped house, how do you determine the HLA of a rectangular shaped house? You pull a tape on the outside all the way around. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And so let's look at it this way. You've got a good old, what I call like a cracker box kind of house. Let's pretend like that's an even rectangle. And then it's even better. Here's your living room over here. Here's the kitchen back here. Here's the bedroom over here. Here's a bathroom maybe over here, maybe another bedroom. If we were to have rooms all differentiating it and stuff, what's this part? Oops, I was hoping that would work. It didn't. Let me try it this way. Still not. Because I've got some lines here. There it is. What's that part? That's the thickness of the walls. In this yellow section, that's the insulation and the wiring and the plumbing. But when you're measuring a square footage, it's all of that included. So you're going to go outside of the house, put the end of the tape measure right here on this corner, bring it all the way to this corner, and take that measurement, and it's 50 feet. Then you're going to do the same thing on this side and get that, and it's 30 feet. And if you want to check just to be sure, I'll usually just go all the way around just to make sure I didn't miss any sort of alcoves or nooks or weird things. Because sometimes on the second story, if this is like the cross section of the house and here's the downstairs, sometimes older houses have a jut out, and upstairs it kicks out 2 feet. And so that's why I take pictures and measure too. And when I get back to the office or the house and I'm actually trying to do the math, in this case, it's pretty simple. 30 times 50. This is a 1,500 square foot heated living area house. But what if it's got an exterior storage compartment, like a closet? Like this section has a door that you get to, and inside of this little area here is a water heater, and it's where they keep their weed eater and their lawnmower. It's like a little 8x8 closet, not accessible from inside the house, not heated or cooled, has no vents. You got to go outside the front door and around to get into it. You would need to deduct that amount of square footage. That is not included in the 1,500 feet of heated living area. Let me get rid of that. We got 1,500 feet. That's the main 30 by 50. We measure this closet, and let's say it's 10 by 10. Well, that's 100 feet that we need to subtract. So this house is actually 1,400 feet of heated living area. And that's a pretty simple version. And those are wall thicknesses that are ridiculously too thick, but I'm just proving a point here. We take the exterior measurement, and then we subtract things that aren't heated space. And so there's a resource that that you have in this class. It's a yellow book. To you, it's a yellow PDF, and it looks like this. And it's in the, let me see if I can go ahead and attach it here, but it's in your resources in the Google Drive. There it is. Now it's in the chat. And so if we look in that, we're going to find a couple things. Let me see. Let's look at it now. Here it is. Couple things. It's pretty sizable. It's about 30-some pages. But what you need to know for this class are these things. Exterior measurement. Measure around the outside. That includes the guts, includes the wall thicknesses. So when it's an 1,800 square foot heated living area reported house, you're going to think, I can't walk on all 1,800 of those feet, because you can't walk inside the walls. That's just the way we do it here. It's got to be differentiated between heated and unheated. If we were to go to, okay, good. If we go to the MLS over here, let's pick a bigger house. Here's the section on square footage. And you can see they've got it divided up. The main level is 1,785 heated living area square feet. And then the upper floor is another almost 1,700. And then there is no third floor or lower level. They've got all these labels here just in case it's a tri-level or a 2-story or a 1-story. There is a basement, and it's 1,256 heated square feet, and then unheated 523 square feet. And then all of these heated ones, HLA ones, come down here to above grade square footage, 3,484. What does above grade mean? Not the basement. You also have to differentiate between above and below grade square footage, because an appraiser will give less value. Listen to me on this one. An appraiser gives less value if it's below grade. Below grade. What does below grade mean? Let's see. Here's our typical split level home. Let's look at a few of them. On this one, there it is. Okay, good. Good example. You walk in that front door, you're going to probably be in a living room, and there's probably a kitchen in the back. And the garage looks like it's maybe one step down from it, right? Maybe a step or two down from the main level is the garage level. But then over here, you have to go up probably 5 or 6 steps to get to the bedrooms up top, and then probably down 5 or 6 or 10 steps to get to the space below, which might be a bedroom, might be a living room. But notice where those windows are. They're pretty darn close to the ground. And by the size of the front door, you can estimate how tall a person is. And if I'm standing in front of this house, my head is probably right about here. I'm 5'10" and a half. In other words, this entire lower level is below the grade of the ground, isn't it? Quite likely. If you broke in this window, you'd have to step down to get to the floor. It's probably a couple of feet below the bottom of the window. And so we need to disclose, if we're listing this property, that this entire lower level is below grade. And that's required because an appraiser is going to say houses like this size range in this market are worth about, I'm picking from air here, $89 a square foot. But that's above grade values. For this, what is this, maybe 20 by 20 feet of lower level? For this 400 square feet, it's not $89 a square foot. It's more like $69 or $59 a square foot. It is definitely discounted. Maybe not that much, but definitely less. You can't give, they won't give as much. Because you've got built-in issues when it's below grade. For one thing, there is soil on the other side of these walls all the way around, which has moisture, which can get into that wall and into the downstairs. And what happens when it rains? Is it handled? Is the rain handled properly? Oops. Is it going to get into the house? Maybe, maybe not. But much more likely it's going to seep through the walls on this level than up here on this level. And so for whatever reason, that is how square footage works and why below grade is given, less value. This one looks like it's all above grade. It's another, you go in to the garage and you have to go upstairs probably to the kitchen, but none of this looks below grade unless it has a basement that we can't see from here. And in this market in North Carolina, we don't usually see true all 100% basements below grade, do we? They're mostly walkout basements. If we were to look at the typical basement in North Carolina, it's something like this. But even this, we're going to report that this level down here is basement because look, it's below grade. It's almost entirely below grade because the grade is where the earth meets the house. This main level is all above grade. It's all above the earth. But if we were to go out of the basement, if we could like be an X-Man or something and go through the walls, we would end up in the dirt if we went through the walls out of this basement, except for on this side that's on the walkout side. Here's another one. Now, a little more of this is still above grade, maybe about 5 feet of it, right? 5 feet back, it's still above grade, but now it's starting to creep up. Now, if you were to walk through the walls into outside, you'd be in the ground, you'd be in the dirt, and all of this up here is below grade, but this little teensy bit right here is above grade. So you just have to disclose to do it properly. And, here's where I was. There we go. So a couple things. The heated category. Is it finished or not? Any space that's not finished. Finished means with finished level of walls, like sheetrock and painted, and then also flooring. Is it the subfloor? What does that look like? Is it this kind of floor because they didn't put any carpet down and you can see that raw wood? If this were part of a room that was for sale, listed for sale, then we would need to acknowledge this is not a finished room. It's got sheetrock, it's painted, but it's not floored. It needs to have a finished type of flooring on it to be considered a finished space. Same thing for here. It looks like they're in the middle of it. They're doing some leveling or something. But sometimes you get into some basement space or lower level space and they just never put a floor in it. You would need to acknowledge that if you listed that house, or advise them to put in some cheap carpet so that you could give that square footage get credit for that square footage. So finished, walls, floors, ceilings, generally accepted for interior construction, painted, carpet, or hardwood. And here's the other thing that you need to know: at least 7 feet of height. If it's a low ceiling, less than 7 feet, unless it's just under the ductwork, that can still be 6'4" and you can still count it. But the magic number for still counting it as finished heated living area is 7 feet. 7 feet of headroom. And then directly accessible from other living areas. That means that from all of the living area you can get, all of it that you can get to while still being in the living area. Why does that matter? If we're in let's look at this one. If you see a house like this, let's say that somehow or other, there's a window here over the garage, but somehow or other from upstairs, you can get to that room over the garage. And it's a finished room over the garage. You might have also seen it referred to as a frog, F-R-O-G. That's what that is in real estate. Finished room over garage. Well, if there's a door between this room and the rest of the house, then we can count these 500 feet of this room and add it to the other 2,400 feet. I'm making up numbers, but we can count all of that as heated living area because it's connected. But this doesn't look like that's what's happening on this one, because that's pretty low space, a low ceiling. I have a feeling in order to get to this room over the garage, you've got to go into the garage, which is not heated, and up its own set of stairs to get to that one room. And you can't get to this second story from the room over the garage. In which case, even if it's heated and cooled, you would have to report this 500 feet separately. It can't be tacked on to the 2,400 feet of the rest of the house. It needs to be acknowledged, separate heated space over the garage. So that's a testable thing too. Connected, that's what they're talking about there. Directly accessible through a door or heated hallway or stairway. And it can get complicated, especially with real creative floor plans. So another great reason to hire it out. Let's see what they're a professional. And when you call to hire it, say, I need somebody experienced to come out and measure this house. I don't want the 2-year guy. I want somebody who's done this 1,000,000 times. Go ahead and measure it yourself and then get that paid version and see how good you were, because you are still, here's a testable thing. You're still responsible for the number. So it better be hiring somebody good, because whatever number they come up with is on your shoulders. And you may as well learn how to do this. Whether you always hire it or not, you need to know the basics so you'll know if they're doing it right or not. Note here in the yellow box, it says, while agents are encouraged to provide complete information, the separate reporting of above and below grade area can be impractical in your marketing. For this reason, we are permitted under these guidelines to report the square footage as the total living area without a distinction between above grade and below grade. However, to help avoid confusion, we need to alert people that there might be some below grade area. So you can still call it 3,700 feet, but make a note. Some of that is lower level because it's a tri-level home and it is partially below grade. And an appraiser is going to give less value to that portion of the house. Sometimes there are stairs. How do we handle the stairs? Under the stairs. Anybody have stairs in your house and you open the door and it's maybe a coat closet? Does that closet go all the way to the floor, or does it stop around the 4 or 5 foot mark? And then you can't even maybe get to the part super right under the stairs, the entire thing. Let me show you here. It might be like this. If we're looking at a cross section of the stairs, here's the floor, here's the upper floor, and the stairs come down like this. Oops, it's going to be smaller. Those are some dangerous stairs. That's stairs. And then here's our little person door. And then inside of that closet, maybe the closet looks like this. It's this amount of usable space. All of this space is not accessible. All of this space is not accessible. But for the purposes of reporting your square footage, you still count this part, even if you can't get to it. If you'd have to get to it by knocking it down with a hammer and crawling through the wall, and if you were to be able to get to it, and you went in this closet, and here you are walking down through this closet, and you'd hit your head around this point, you still count all of this. In other words, all of the part under the stairs counts for your square footage. And so if we are looking above ground or from overhead view, and here's our house, and here's some stairs in the middle of the house, we're just going to pull tape around the exterior and count that entire perimeter and not even worry about the stairs, taking out any sort of amount for stairs underneath that you can't even get to. We're still counting it. It counts for that. And what are the stairs to? They're to an upper level. And let's say this is the upper level. Here's the stairs. Let's pretend that's the same size. We're counting the hole that the stairs comes up through to get into the second level. If those stairs can be kind of pushed, if they could, not that they can, but if you could like push those stairs up and fill that space of the hole that has to be in the second level floor in order to go up and down those stairs, and there's no extra space around it, like a big fancy 2-story foyer kind of a thing might look. Let's look at it this way. Sometimes you go in these fancy houses and you see something like this. And you go in that front door and you can see the upstairs from downstairs. That's a lot of space that is more than the space the stairs would take up. You following me? And so measuring this foyer would be a nightmare. For one thing, the stairs are curved. For another thing, you've got to figure out if these stairs could be pushed up into this floor, you still have a lot of open space unfilled by them. And so you've got to subtract that amount of empty space from the total. I'm hiring this out all day long. I might give it a shot myself, but I'm going to hire it out and use that guy's measurement because this is a little too complicated. If I have to use a protractor or some sort of a curve measuring device to figure this out, no thanks. So 2-story foyers can be interesting. This one might not be too bad because at least the stairs aren't curved, but it's still pretty intimidating. I'm probably going to hire this measuring out as well. Because again, at the end of the day, if you can stand upstairs and see down to the lower level, all of that space is not going to be included in the second level because you can't walk on the floor on it, right? So measuring is tricky and you want to make sure you do it right. So stairs, bay window. Sometimes you've got to, well, all times you've got to measure for the bay window. houses have a bay window. What does that mean? It looks like this. Here's the wall, and then maybe there's like this little bump out, and it's like the kitchen area. Maybe there's a little bench in that bay window area. Who knows? But it's more than just this wall, right? You've got to measure this space and add that to the square footage, to the heated square footage. If it has a floor, where'd I go? There we go. The bay window gets counted if it has its own floor instead of like a built-in bench, a ceiling height of at least 7 feet, and is a finished area. So the bay window counts too. And then I think this is the last real thing you need to know about measuring, and it's like a bonus room with a sloped ceiling. There we go. There's some diagrams in the second half of this booklet, so it's not just all words. But if we get to, you can kind of see it's talking about at least 7 feet. If it's under ductwork, it can be 6 feet that still gets counted right here. And then you're counting the stairs on both levels. But if we get to one with a slope like this, like a bonus room over the garage, and it's got angled ceilings, if that room goes all the way to a wall that is lower than 5 feet, then you don't count that part of the floor. You only count the part of the floor that is at the 5 foot high mark. So it might be like maybe the seller finished this room out themselves, and it's a bonus room over the garage, and here's the floor. And the seller said, well, you know what? Let's just make the most of it. I've got small kids, and we could stick some little toy boxes and toys, and the little kid could play over here in this area. But when we pull a tape measure across that entire width, maybe it's 20 feet from the bottommost part of the room to the other part. And an adult could not walk all the way over there without crouching over. So the part that stops at 5 feet, find that place on the floor. And so this is how much of the floor distance we could count. And maybe it's like 15 feet. We could give it 15 feet of width because we got to go to the 5 foot high mark on both sides. Does that make sense? It can't be this part. We can't count this part here that's less than 5 feet high. We've got to only count the part that's 5 feet high. Whatever that width is, all the way through the depth of that room, that's how many square feet are in this room that's reportable. Heated living area, usable space. So what to do with slope ceilings, that's what you do. You're looking for the 5 foot mark. Oops, there we go. And notice here is a good example of a stairway that has an overlook like we saw in some of those fancy houses. And in this case, the white section does not get counted as square feet on the upstairs because you can't walk on it. You'd have to levitate. We can't levitate as humans, right? Without equipment. So you can count it on the first floor and the part under the stairs, but you can't count this part, the L shape in white, for the second floor space because it's open air. It's open area down to the first floor. There's a good example of an overhead view showing the width is 15 feet from 5 foot high to 5 foot high mark within that room. And they call it knee walls. They point out, obviously the yellow part is the part that's getting counted. The white part is not. Garage doesn't get counted in heated living area. And you got to allow for any sort of exterior features that might have jut outs or cut ins, and just measure the part that is. Here's a classic case of an older house that has a little 2 foot jut out on the upper level compared to the downstairs. And that's easy to miss. When you're pulling tape, you might forget to look up and realize, oh, wait, that entire back wall is 2 feet longer than it is on the main level because it's got this. And I've missed it before and thought, wait, in the picture, I'm seeing this jut out, and I've had to go back out to get another measurement to see just how far out is this jut. I don't want to guess. Is it 18 inches? Is it 2 feet? So pictures and looking all around very carefully and experience, just a lot of measuring. Or hiring it out, but you're still responsible. Here's an example of when the exterior accessible storage closet that is not heated, maybe it has a water heater in it, maybe it's got a place for your tools, but it does not get included. That's why it's white, not yellow. That's the gist of it. Notice for condominiums, they make a note here. We know that's airspace. So we don't measure the outside of condos. We measure inside from interior wall to interior wall when it's a condominium, because that's what a condo is. It's interior airspace, so we want to measure appropriately. Here's a nightmare house that I'm definitely hiring out, because look at that thing. It's got a stop sign room in it and all kinds of jut outs and a bay window and like a covered porch on the front and a shape of the upstairs that has nothing to do with the shape of the downstairs. So this one would take a while. I might measure it, but I'm going to get a backup measurement of somebody who's done these a few million times. And that's the book. So catching up in the chat. For the finished room above the garage, if it's connected through a hallway on the second level, would you add it to the square feet, or would you still need to add it as additional? If it's connected by a heated hallway, then yes, you count it in the total. Let me know if that's not the answer that you're looking for. Tell me more, Tara. Would the same apply for an in-law suite? Would the same what? I flew by it because I didn't catch that question when it came in. Okay, good. All right. There we go. So we want to know how big the property is so that we can figure out what it's worth. Because if the square footage is off, and guess what? Tax record is probably wrong about the square footage. And as an owner, you're glad, because it's usually wrong to the good of you. It's usually smaller on the tax record than it really is in real life. That's cool, but don't rely on it for figuring out value. You might even want to measure it before you do your market analysis. For one thing, nobody else is doing it, and it's going to show that you're a professional. But you could say, look, guys, don't have time to measure it, but I'm going to go off of this measurement. And based on this, once we confirm how big it is, we might then revise what this house might sell for. But we're going to have this conversation with them. What do we think we should price it at? What do we think it might sell for? When we get to the chapter 17 about valuation, we'll learn that we can't say that we as a broker are going to do an appraisal. Only people that can do appraisals is appraisers. So what we do is a market analysis. And we also are not allowed to say that I'm going to tell you the value of your home. We don't give value as brokers. We give probable sales price. So that's what we say. I'm going to come over to your house on our listing appointment tomorrow night and give you a market analysis to show you the probable sales price. And ideally, you want to give it to them in a range. Don't give them a hard number, because some things are out of your control. And if you say, I think this house will sell for $724,000, well, are they really going to fix it up the way they promised to? Are they really going to pick up their underwear? Are they really going to make it showable and do the staging they're promising? Or once you sign the papers, are they going to get lazy? And you promise 724 with the assumption that they're going to do their part of the bargain, but they let you down. And now they want top dollar price, but they're not giving top dollar showing condition. So I would say it should sell between 700 and 724 depending on you. If you live up to your end, if you do what you're promising to do, if it shows well and it's repaired and you do the repairs that we're talking about, then yes, you could get toward the top of that range. But if you decide that's just too much for you to handle, fine, that's okay. But be prepared for a lower offer. Be prepared to have to take less and gets it off your shoulders. You know, don't sign your name on a single number price. Put more of that responsibility on them so they understand later, oh, it hasn't sold yet. I know, because you didn't do everything you promised you would. Some things you don't say as harshly as that, but it's more fun now to say it harshly. But then you'd say, well, you know, I appreciate that you couldn't get around to it, but that's the price you have to pay, is when you don't do all the staging stuff and the repairs. Other houses get this because they were in better condition. And I'll even show them the houses if I have to. I'll take them to those houses and say, hey, seller, let's go look at a couple of your competition houses. At the very least, I'll show them the pictures and they can see for themselves, oh, wow, my place looks terrible compared to those. They are really on the ball. Maybe I should do that too. And you're like, yeah, you think? Let's do that. So they can see it firsthand. Show it better is better than tell it. And they can appreciate, yeah, what I need to do to get this thing sold is be competitive. So the seller determines that listing price, but with your guidance. You're telling them, look, here's what we think it'll sell for, and therefore here's where we should price it. And there's different strategies about pricing. The Real Estate Commission officially says give enough cushion to allow for negotiating. But in a market like this, you might also want to speed things up, and you could price it closer to what you think it's going to sell for and not have much cushion, because that might create multiple offers, and buyers who are afraid of losing an opportunity are more likely to make bigger offers because they want to capitalize on this opportunity. And so pricing it a little bit lower without a cushion might actually end up getting them outbidding each other and bringing it back up even more than what they would have made if you had priced in some cushion, some room for negotiating. How can a listing go away? Well, the best way is always closing. Full performance. Success means you get paid. Another way is an expiration. And the whole listing term expired. How long is a listing term? It's whatever you agree to. It's negotiable. And I try really hard to get 6 months to a year. And most of the time they go with it. But if it's a kind of a stranger to me and I've never worked with them before, and if it's not a referral kind of a situation, they might not be so generous. They might say, well, that's too long. I'm going to swing for the fences, try for the most, but if they refuse, then it's up to you. How little am I willing to take? Is it fair for you to take a 2-week listing period? That's a pretty easy no. That's not fair. It's not even enough time to get everything up and running, really. How about a month? Still not as much as I want. 2 months, that might be my bare minimum, but it's going to depend on the market and how fast things sell. Which goes back to looking at the MLS and seeing the stats and seeing how many days on the market they sell for. They sell within. When I was brand new, average days on the market, 120 days. Today, 20, 30 days. Last year before, 20, 30 minutes. Maybe not quite, but pretty darn short. Pretty low days on market. Would I take a 2-month listing last year? Absolutely. Because we're probably going to be done in 30 days to closing. We'll have it under contract in a day or two. Today, I would rather have 3 as a bare minimum 3 months. But the way I justify it to the seller is this. I say, look, it could be that we get an offer or that it gets accepted. You're fine with it. And we go under contract and we get all the way up to closing day. And for some reason, the buyer just walks away. Out of either of our control, no fault of yours or mine. They just change their mind. If that happens, I want to be able to just get your house right back on the market and try to find that replacement buyer instead of worrying about paperwork. So let's just write it for a 3 or 4 month term or whatever I'm trying to get and just go from there. And usually that's enough to get them on board. But if they put their foot down and they're only willing to give you a super short time, that might be a red flag for you to walk away from it now. Why even start out with that kind of a limitation on yourself? Some of these things that you ask and present to them and have the nerve and the courage to ask them is more to watch how they respond than it is for the answer they're giving you. To try to weed them out and see, are they going to be a nightmare to work with? And do I need to cut my losses now and just walk away from a 30-minute appointment instead of walking away from a 10-hour, 20-hour investment with a crazy person later, and I wasted all that time for nothing? So kind of seeing how people are going to be, listening to that interior voice. So expiration could happen. Mutual agreement. I've had that happen before, and I think I've told you the story. It resulted in them coming back to me a year later and buying a bigger house, and it worked out even better. But sometimes they might never come back. But you could mutually agree, long as your BIC gives you permission to let them out of the listing agreement, let them out early, either for free or maybe charge them a fee to let them out early. Either party could breach. They could declare bankruptcy. I had that happen one time. The seller, after 5 months on the market, basically said, I've talked to an attorney and I want to declare bankruptcy, and I get to keep my RV and my truck, which is what I wanted to begin with. And sorry for your 5 months of wasted time, Neil. You're done. I had produced a buyer, but they were a loan buyer. So I had a ready, willing buyer, but we didn't have loan approval. Therefore, they weren't a ready, willing, and able buyer. So if I tried to sue them, I probably would not have been successful getting that commission. I was just out, right? And sometimes that happens. Destruction of the property ends a listing. Blows up, burns down, washes away. Your listing washes away too. You don't have a listing agreement anymore because it's destroyed. And then death of either party means the seller dies, the listing goes away. But if you as the listing agent dies, the listing is still in effect because it's the company, the firm that owns the listing. They're just going to reassign it. Property disclosure. Have we talked about this property disclosure? I don't think we have. This one is the RPODs. We talked a little bit about it. The RPODs is currently a 4-pager. They're going to bump it up to 8, but it's pretty much the same content. It'll just be easier to read, larger print. But it's everything about the property. Problems. Check yes if there's a problem, no if there's not. Or the seller has that option to say, not telling. Called no representation. I'm not telling one way or the other. Here's the testable thing for you. As a broker, and you're dealing with a 97-year-old seller with glasses the size of Coke bottles and they can barely see, and you're asking them to read this fine print, you're going to want to just take it from them and start asking them questions and filling it out for them to be nice. Don't do it. You can't do it. You would need to say, can we get somebody over here to help you fill this out? Because I can't as much as I want to. But we can talk them through it and answer their questions. What does plastic pipe mean? What does this thing mean? You can counsel them, guide them, say, here's what this means, but you can't put the pen to paper and fill this out for them. That is a huge one. Easy test question. Agent must not fill this disclosure out for them. They've got to do it themselves. So while we as brokers have to disclose all material facts, and not only disclose them, but find them and discover them to some certain level, the seller can choose not to disclose them because they can check no representation for everything, except for 3 things. Do we remember from a couple weeks ago what 3 things must always be disclosed? What 3 things, one of which is based on a TV show? Breaking Bad, the meth house, ever used to produce meth, must be disclosed. Another one is that gray piping, polybutylene pipes, but here's an important caveat. Poly pipes that have ever leaked must be disclosed. If they never leaked, you don't have to disclose it. You don't have to say this has poly pipes because they've never leaked. But if they have leaked, you've got to tell that it has the polybutylene pipes. And then synthetic stucco. That's a good point Sheena makes. Lead-based paint also has to be, well, kind of. Let's say it a certain way. Lead-based paint has to be disclosed only that it might be there. If that's all you know, that it was built before 78, all the seller has to do is say it might have lead-based paint. If they know for sure it's got lead-based paint, then yes, it has to be disclosed. So you're right. But synthetic stucco goes a little beyond that. It might be that they've replaced all the synthetic stucco with brick. But because it could have had water damage that's still there because of the nature of synthetic stucco, it gets trapped in like house cancer. It gets worse over time, and you may not even see it until it's the worst. Synthetic stucco, whether even repaired or replaced, is a material fact that must be disclosed. So those three things. But besides that, seller can say no representation. I'm not telling. This discovery thing, what is expected of us to discover? Does that mean we have to put on our broker logo hazmat suit and crawl up in the crawl space? Thankfully, no. No crawl spacing required, although I usually do it. I did it in the last one because needed to make sure something was done right. It was just quicker for me to see it myself and take a picture of it. But that is not the norm. It's not in the job description. I would always suggest you open it and bend over and look in there, give it a sniff, see if it smells weird, musty, like mildew, unless you're allergic. Don't get sick over it. But that discovery pretty much means accessible and easy, like walking through the house. Can you turn on the dishwasher with a flick of a button? Yeah. And so that you can discover if the dishwasher works by turning it on. And that is within our scope of responsibility as per the real estate commission. Can you turn on a light switch? Yeah. See if the lights work. Could you open windows? Do they stay shut? Are they stuck shut? Do they guillotine, meaning fall back shut? Don't get your thumbs. One morning at my house, I got 15-year-old windows on a carport I did, and they've all the springs are shot. That's what you get for buying cheap windows 15 years ago. So that morning, I tried to open a window, and it immediately slammed shut on my finger. Then I'm like saying some colorful words, and I went to the very next window beside it, tried again, same thing. It didn't even occur to me in that moment in my groggy early morning that both windows might be shot. And so my finger got smashed twice in a row in about 10 seconds time. Poor me. So all of that is within our scope. We can check those relatively easily. Here are those three options: yes, no, and no representation. And then here's the basic disclosures. The RPODs, the residential property one, and the MOG are required before the offer is made. If you don't get them into that buyer's possession at the time the offer is made, then you've given them a 3-day window loophole to back out just because they didn't see these things in time when they made their offer. Close that loophole. Don't give it to them. Get this thing available. Put it in the MLS as an attachment. If you find out from an agent they're making an offer, find out their email, send this to them. If they can't, you don't want to give them any reason not to have this signed by the buyer at time of offer so as to create this 3 days possible for that buyer to back out from the time that you do get it to them or from the time it goes under contract. And then lead-based paint conditional upon if it's the time frame. Built before 78, then yes, that disclosure must be included too. Working with buyers, we'll pick up when we come back, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Welcome back. All right. So, yeah, working with buyers. Let's talk about working with buyer part of the equation to finish out our chapter 8. We looked at the working with agents disclosure, and there are 4 choices on each page, the one for the sellers and the one for the buyer. The top one is working with a seller or working with a buyer. The middle 2 are the same for both. They are whether you're willing to do dual or designated agency. And then the last 2, one of them is working with an unrepresented seller, or in this case, working with an unrepresented buyer. So if the buyer doesn't want representation, then we would acknowledge that, look, you're not a buyer. I'm not a buyer agent for you. I'm going to be a seller sub agent, and I can help you, but I will not be representing you, and I have no loyalty to you. Beware. Don't tell me any secrets. I can get you through the transaction, but don't tell me stuff and expect me to keep it a secret. I am required as a seller sub-agent, because you won't hire me as a buyer agent, I'm required to tell the seller anything you tell me. Do agents really do it this way? I have a feeling a lot of them don't. But if they got in trouble, if they got investigated, and they found out from that buyer that they were keeping secrets, they would get in trouble. So it's just a warning. Don't share anything confidential, because I am not a buyer's agent for you. I'm a seller sub-agent helping you. But my loyalty is to the seller. We can change that, by the way, buyer. We can change that by you signing a buyer agency agreement. And now I get to be 100% for you. Now you can tell me your secrets. Tell me that you would really pay double. Instead of this lowball offer, you'd really pay more, and I can keep that a secret. You don't have to worry about that. But if you refuse to sign buyer agency with me, then what I am to you is a seller sub-agent. There's something called a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement that exists that we could do. But in this case, you're giving that buyer permission to use other agents along with you. And then whichever one of you is the one they use on the one they end up buying is who gets paid. So you're giving them some freedom. I don't do these, but you could. Maybe it's the only way you can get them to sign something, and you feel pretty confident they're going to use you because you're going to win them over. That's fine. But just know it is non-exclusive right there in the name. You're only going to get paid if you are the procuring cause of sale. You started a chain of events that remained continuous, unbroken, resulting in a sale. If you're that person, then you get paid. But it might be the other agent that they also have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement with. So it's sort of like the buyer version of an open listing agreement. Not great, not ideal. We've talked about oral buyer agency. It is not in writing, as the name shows. We owe them everything. We, the agent, have to do everything for them. We owe them all of old car, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care, but they owe us none of it. Not even loyalty. They don't owe us a thing. And they could go use somebody else and look at the same houses this afternoon as what they looked at with us and buy one of them, and we have no rights to getting income, getting paid on that. And we started out the day tonight with this question: how long can oral buyer agency last? As long as you want to keep showing them stuff without them making any offers. But the minute they make an offer, then you've got to reduce this to writing and put this in writing. If they refuse at that point to put this in writing, then you could still help them, but your role is now going to be a sub-agent to the seller. You started out being an oral buyer agent, expecting to win them over, expecting them to sign it and put it in writing at time of offer. But if they refuse, what are your choices? Your only choice is to keep going and help them as a sub-agent to the seller. Now, you should have prepared them and told them, look, I've been acting as a buyer agent for you, oral buyer agent, and you've told me some things that the seller would probably like to know. So fair warning, if you refuse to sign buyer agency, I'm required to tell the seller all that stuff you told me while I was your oral buyer agent. And that might convince them to go ahead and put it in writing. This probably isn't as big a thing as we're making it out to be right now. Like in real life, they're probably going to sign it. But we've got to teach you the extremes, right? So you have to know what if. Exclusive buyer agency agreement, as opposed to that one we saw a little bit ago that was non-exclusive. So exclusive must be in writing by the time the offer is made. The buyer's only working with you, no others. It's like a little marriage. It's like a marriage to them. They are only working with you, but you work with obviously multiple buyers. And it's similar to that exclusive right to sell listing agreement. You're working together. You are their person. They're not cheating on you. They're not going out with someone else. There's also this, working with sellers as a buyer agent could be either helping a for sale by owner, helping your buyer buy a for sale by owner, or helping your buyer and the listing they like happens to be a limited service listing. In both of these cases, you're having to deal with that seller directly. You're having to do more than you normally would. And you've got to be super careful not to let them trust you, confide in you on confidential information, and don't give them the impression that you're a dual agent, taking just as much care of them as you are your own buyer. Got to remind them you are unrepresented. Don't fall in love with me, bro. I am not your person. I'm the buyer's person. So keep that in mind. Keep your secrets. The differences between buyer agency, in that buyer agency agreement, we could put in specific types of property. We could say, I'm only going to be your buyer agent for houses in this neighborhood or this kind of property, this area, or I'm going to do it this way, not that way. So you can get specific. I usually make it as big and universal and generic as possible. I want to help them no matter what they buy. I don't want to only help them if they buy a townhouse. I want to help them if they change their mind and buy a single family house. When could this non-exclusive buyer agency thing make sense? Even if you were not a fan of this, like I'm not a fan of this, when might I do this? What if they're a relocating buyer from another state and they're just not sure if they want to buy in Charlotte or in Raleigh? I don't work Raleigh. I would be doing them a disservice to try to work Raleigh. I don't subscribe to that MLS. It's 2 or 3 hours away. I don't know it like I know this area. And so they might be best served to have a Raleigh agent if they end up in Raleigh and a Charlotte agent, me, if they end up in Charlotte. In that event, when they're still deciding between major markets like that, you might be the first one to talk to them and you say to them, look, I'm not doing you a good benefit by helping you in Raleigh, but I can find you a good agent there. And you could get a referral fee if they end up in Raleigh, at least covering your time that you spent showing them houses here. So they look at houses here, they look at houses in Raleigh, you have a referral arrangement with that other agent, and you have this agreement so that you're a non-exclusive buyer agent because they're also working with that buyer agent there. And so at the very worst case scenario, they say, nope, looks like Raleigh's the best place for us, Neil. Sorry. We looked at houses with you for 8 hours, a couple of Saturdays. Okay, that's fine. I'm still making a referral fee from the agent in Raleigh that you are going to use for the actual purchase. Does that make sense? That's when this would make the most sense to me. And I wouldn't be mad about it, right? Because that's fine. I get it. It's hard to decide between some of these major markets in the state. Dual agency, we are working for both of them, right? We have adverse interests in the same transaction. The buyer's trying to get the most house for the money. The seller's trying to get the most money for the house. Opposite goals. And you're the only agent. That's tough. That's when you're going to make sure that you explain about the loyalty being off the table. And first of all, make sure your firm is letting you be a dual agent. And secondly, make sure that you want to be one or you're comfortable being one. And then third, make sure that both the buyer and the seller give you permission to do it. So you've got to have 4 permissions: yourself, your firm, and buyer and seller. They've got to give informed consent. And if they don't, you can't do it. What does that mean? You have told them what it means, what it's about, and they say yes. Not just consent, but informed consent. You educated them and they said, yeah, okay, go for it. But you are limiting your old car to both of them. It's odd car. No L, right? No loyalty. So you can't be more loyal to one of them than the other. As this shows here, same point, different graphic. Then we could get into this option, this portion, this type of dual agency. What if you explain dual agency? And here's how I explain it. Hey, buyer, so you're interested in my listing, and I could be a dual agent for you if you give me permission. My firm lets me do it. I'm okay with doing it. The seller has given me permission. Now all that remains is for you to give me permission. So let me explain how it works. As a dual agent, I can't give you any inside information on the other side. And I can't give them your secrets either. I have to keep both your secrets from each side. I can help you both, but I can't be more loyal or give an advantage to you over them or them over you. If you were to tell me, hey, Neil, I want to offer 480, but if I need to go to 5, I'll do it. You could tell me that, and I would keep that secret. But if you ask me, hey, Neil, would they take 580? Can I get them down to 570? I can't tell you that even if I know it, because I have to give them the same courtesy. That makes sense? So I explain it to them that way, and sometimes they might say, well, that sounds terrible. Why am I paying you? Why are you getting paid if you can't give me all of you? And I would say, that's okay. Rather than go to another firm to get your own buyer agent, I can help you even more. Now, I can't because I don't have other agents in my firm. But if I did, I could say, look, I can connect you with another agent in my firm, and they can be your designated buyer's agent. And you're going to buy my listing, and my seller still has me completely for them. And we can restore loyalty, treat it like 2 separate firms again, but it's still an in-house sale. You have a designated agent, and my seller has a designated agent. 2 heartbeats, 2 brokers under the same firm. It's a type of dual agency that restores loyalty. Now, if we're in the middle of a transaction and somehow maybe I find out that buyer would pay more than they're claiming they will, they make an offer, but I find out they'd pay more, I would have to tell you. And I'm not going to screw this up. I definitely will keep your secrets. But if somehow the buyer agent, designated buyer agent, found out you would take less than what you claimed, that agent would have to tell them, the buyer. In that case, if they were to find out a secret about each other, then if it all went up to the real estate commission as a complaint, the firm and the BIC would have a problem. They'd have to prove that they weren't the leak of the information, that it wasn't because of our in-house procedures and policies and access to files that caused somebody to learn something confidential. So that would be its own problem. But along the way, as a designated dual agent, they have their own person and the seller has their own person. So at least 2 designated brokers. Could the buyer have 3 designated buyer agents and the seller have 4 within the same firm? Yes, sure. There could be like a 3-person team and all of them are designated buyer agents for that one buyer. So it's not that it's always only 2 brokers in the same firm. It's at least 2. One for the buyer, one for the seller. And when you have designated Agency, one for the buyer, one for the seller, or at least one for the buyer, one for the seller. All the other agents, listen to this one, all the other agents in the firm are true dual agents. They are dual agents, but only the ones that are designated are the designated for the buyer versus the seller. Which of the following is not allowed in designated dual agency? You're under the same firm. One person's going to be designated to help the buyer, one for the seller. Which of these arrangements is not allowed? A provisional broker up against a broker in charge of another company? Is that allowed? Well, a couple of issues there. Number one, that's not dual agency because it would be another company's BIC. And yes, a provisional can be up against any other BIC because it's not their BIC. Number two, you guys got it. Provisional versus their own BIC is the only thing not allowed because that broker in charge needs to be able to help that provisional broker through the transaction. They need to be able to confide in them and say, what should I do next? The offer came in at this much under asking price. How should I counsel the client? Or the repairs came back and they wanted to replace the roof for $18,000. How should I counsel the client? What do I say? The BIC needs to be able to help them with that. The BIC can't do that job well if the BIC is the representative of the other party in the transaction. I think you should tell the seller to pay for the roof because I'm the buyer agent and it will help my client. That's not going to work, right? We can't have that going on. So PB versus PB is another one that some students struggle with. They think, well, how can the BIC give advice to two different provisional brokers on opposite sides of the transaction without violating anything? Well, they can. They just don't violate, right? They can tell the provisional helping the buyer, look, here's how you do this thing. They're not going to tell them, and if you ask for a little bit less, I happen to know for a fact the seller would take it. They're just not going to tell that part, even if they know it. They can keep secrets. They're just guiding the provisionals through the transaction. So PB versus PB is allowed even though they have the same BIC. And then provisional broker versus full broker is allowed because that provisional broker has the guidance of the BIC, leveling the playing field, right? Obviously, full broker against another full broker is okay. And then a full broker can go up against their own broker in charge, and that's okay too, because there's not that same level of oversight and trust and confidentiality that's needed in provisional broker to BIC relationship. This question, always true. All agency agreements must be in writing. But Neil, what about oral buyer agency? Well, you're not going to get paid if it's not in writing because at the time of offer, it has to be converted to writing. So while, yes, for a little while, it can be verbal, oral, all agency agreements must, we could put in the word eventually, be in writing between firm and client. And the eventually would only cover oral buyer agency because you've got to have listing agency right off the bat. There is no temporary amount of time allowable for that one. Commission splits. Here's how that looks as we finish out this chapter, this chapter. $1 million sale price. Who's with me? Want to sell that $1 million house? 6% commission, $60,000 total commission. Oh no, we have to share it with another firm. Oh, well, if I only get 30, then just forget it. I don't want it. Wait, no, I'll take it. I'm taking that too. So we've got an even split here between the listing firm and the selling firm. That doesn't have to be even. It could be different. It could be uneven. But a focus on the listing side, maybe another even split between the firm and the listing broker, and in which case they're each getting $15,000. And we just go down the tree, right? Depending on the splits. And over here, it got different. That selling firm, the one helping the buyer, that broker, maybe they have a better negotiating ability and they negotiated with their firm for a higher split. Maybe they're more experienced. For whatever reason, they have a 70% split with their firm. So they end up walking away with $21,000 while the listing broker only walked away with $15,000 because the split within their firm is their own thing. And out of all of this commission information, all of it must be disclosed to the parties to the transaction except this part. What your split with your firm is none of the client's business. They might ask, and it would be up to you if you want to tell them or not, but you could figure out maybe a polite way to say, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, it's really not something I'm required to disclose. It's more of a personal thing. How much do you make? What's your salary? What's your social security number? Those might not be the best way to handle that question, but that's sort of the gist of it, isn't it? It's funny how people like to get all in our money business, but they would never talk about their salary at the same level that they ask us what we earn on stuff. So how does that math work? I'm breaking it down super simple, but you as adults who pay bills probably know and could figure out the commission in dollars is just multiplying the price times the commission rate. But if we were to apply it to a T formula, since we've been doing those, add this one to your list of T formulas. And anytime the things are multiplied by each other, they go on the bottom. And the thing on top is the thing that the two bottom things multiplied together equal. And so if you know this in this format, now it doesn't matter what they give you on the test. You can find out the third thing. So if they tell you the commission in dollars is $4,300 and the commission rate is 5%, then you just plug them in. 4,300 on the top divided by 5% means a sale price of $86,000. I did that on a calculator just now. Right? So that's why this T formula might be important to, even though it's simple just to figure out on your own, this might be easier for you in that moment when they give you other things than the sale price and the commission rate. What if they give you the commission in dollars and the sales price? And the commission in dollars that you earned was $21,000 and the sale price was $500,000. Then the commission on that is 4.2%. So knowing how this is positioned will help you, regardless of which two of the three things you know. You can always figure out the third one. When we get down to the commission split with your firm, total commission in dollars times that commission split percentage equals the commission split in dollars. Don't forget these slides are all in the Google Drive. If you want to take longer and look at them and write them down, you can always do that. So let's look at this one. We've got a couple of potential calculations here. A property sold for $500,000. Seller paid 6% commission. The commission was split equally between the two firms. The listing firm had a split with their broker of 50-50. This is what we just saw, by the way, the tree that we just saw. The selling broker got 70% split. How much did the so-and-so receive? So if the question is how much was the total commission? Oh, this isn't quite the same as that tree because it's only a $500,000 price, not $1 million. So the total commission here is just going to be $500,000 times 6%. And that gives us $30,000 total. If it says how much did the listing broker receive, we're going to take that $30,000 and divide it by 2 to get to $15,000 and divide it again because it's a 50-50 split between the broker and the firm to get the $7,500. Let's do that in action, like real action, live action. So we've got the $500,000 price at 6% commission. And so we can just plug that in to get the total, which is a total dollars of commission of $30,000. And then the question is, how much did the listing side receive? We've got the listing firm and the selling firm side. And the total here, and it was a 50-50 split, just going to be half of that 30. So 30,000 times 50% means $15,000 on both sides. And then the actual question was, again, what did the broker get? If they and their firm have a 50-50 split, that's just going to be another one. 15,000 times 50% means the broker got $7,500. Over here, the broker got 70% compared to the firm's 30%. Oops, sorry. There we go. So that's going to be different. But it's just that. It's just working your way down through that little, I call it a tree. If it's the selling broker's 70%, then we're going to take that 15,000 and multiply it by 70%. So this broker making this 70% is getting $10,500. How much is the firm getting? We could do that a couple different ways. Since we already know the 10.5, we could just subtract it from 15 and find out that the broker is getting 4,500. But if we didn't already know and we're doing this brand new, we would take that 15,000 and multiply it by 30%. And there's that same 4,500. So just being able to navigate around back and forth these different splits. Yeah, and that's what the rest of that slide's about. So total commission split between the firms. The split between the firms, by the way, just as a point of awareness, that split is going to be some sort of you're going to see a total commission, and you're going to see, if you see numbers like 2 and 3%, some those low, sort of low numbers, those are talking about the differences between what these firms are getting. Listing firms getting 3% while the selling firm is getting 2%. So low single digit numbers, you're thinking probably we're dealing with firm splits between the firms. Bigger numbers like 80-20, 70-30, 90-10, 50-50, we're talking about the split between the broker and their own firm. So that might help you mentally get yourself in the right position. Think, okay, what am I dealing with here? What are they looking for? Seller net. How much do I get when I sell my house? What will I end up with? Sometimes people think, oh, you say it's worth $750? Great. I could use $750,000. Wait a minute. Got to remind you of some things. Do you have a loan? Well, yeah. I got a $600,000 balance on my loan. Okay, well, then you're not walking away with $750,000. Now we're talking $150, but there's more. Wait, there's more. There's my fee. Got to subtract that out. There's also some closing costs you need to pay, like deed preparation, which is about $500. Excise tax on $750,000, which is $1,500, among other things. So this is what we're talking about. You're at that listing table, and they're asking you, hey, what am I going to get? Is it even worth my time to try to sell it? If I can't get what I need to go buy the next one, I don't want to sell it. Okay, fine. Let's see what you'll net. And that's when we go down through something like this. Don't let the volume, the size of that paragraph scare you. It's just a scenario. And there's not many numbers here. Let's just read it. On a listing appointment, the seller tells you they're selling their house because they want to build a new one. They're going to need $190,000 from selling this old house so they can put it toward buying the new house. Their other expenses for the sale include $3,500 toward repairs, because they got to do some certain things in order to be like competitive, because the market is a certain way, and maybe they have to fix this and that and the other just to get the top dollar they're going to want to get for the house. $177,000 to pay off their existing mortgage, their current loan balance. $2,300 for closing costs. Don't worry about what those are. The problem is just testing you on How much does a house need to sell for in order for them to end up with 190? So they're going to give you a laundry list of various expenses. You are charging them 7% commission because you're just that good. From your research and knowledge of the market, you've determined that houses like theirs are selling between a certain range. We don't need to know that right now. How much will they need to sell their house for in order to get all of these expenses covered and walk away with $190,000 that they can use toward buying their next house? That's the first question. In real life, the next question is, therefore, is it possible for them to have enough money from the sale to fund their new build? If they need at least $190,000 to buy the next one, we got to see if that's the number we end up with. If the number that it needs to sell for in order to get this number is even reasonable. We're going to do some math here in a minute. And if we find that it needs to sell for like, I don't know, let's say $380,000, but houses like theirs only sell for $320,000, then either they're going to need to settle for less than 190 in their pocket, or they're going to have to just not sell because they can't get 190 out of it because their house won't possibly sell for the 380 it needs to sell for. I just pulled that number from air. Let's see how this math problem would work. What do we do on these net problems? We add up all of the numbers. And I think we did this last week, but now you know the secret. So let's do it again. All of the numbers that we can add up are the dollar amounts. Identify all those costs in dollars. The problem with this problem is they're not all given to you. The 7% is something you have to figure out for yourself. So once we've added them up, we find out that $372,800 is needed to cover all those expenses plus them getting $190 in their pocket. That does not include your 7% commission. If we were to base 7% off of this $372,000, we would be doing ourselves a disservice because we don't want to get paid commission on this net number. We want to get paid commission on the bigger number that's called the sales price. So we rewrite it. Don't calculate it 7% of that net number. You're cheating yourself out of money. First of all, we got to think of it like our split between our seller. If we're charging 7% commission of the sale price, 7% of the sale price, then our piece of the sale price is 7% of it. And the seller's piece is what's left. So 100% total sale price minus 7 leaves the seller with 93%. We need to use that number for the calculation we're going to make next. What portion of the total sale price goes to the broker? It's what you're charging. It's 7% in this case. That leaves the seller with 93% of the sale price. So the seller's portion in dollars, we already know. It's all those expenses plus what they want to walk away with. Ideally, the seller's portion is going to be $372,800. Now we need to kind of work backwards, do some backwards math to figure out, okay, then how much is our commission in dollars? And so we write it in a little formula. $372,800 is 93% of what? Divide sign replaces the is, plug in $372,800 divided by 93%, revealing that the purchase price needs to be $400,860 in order for them to walk away with $190 and for you to get paid 7% of the purchase price and them still having enough money left to pay all those other things. If this was revealed in our math, what is our next question that we need to talk to the seller about? Hey, seller, doing my research, I've found that houses like yours are selling between $405 and $415. Is that good news for everybody? Yeah, because it's looking like it's going to sell for at least as much, but probably more than what it needs to for them to accomplish their goals and for you to get paid what you want to get paid. But what if it's the opposite? And you say, hey, seller, you need 400, but houses like yours right now are selling for between 350 and 370. What do you want to do? The seller's got some choices to make. They could either choose, well, I can't sell it then. I can't get enough to do what I want to do because I need to end up with $190,000. Or they could say, well, maybe I'll buy a house that doesn't require $190,000. Maybe I'll buy a house that could only require $170,000. That might be an option. Or they could say, inevitably, well, this could all work, if you weren't so darn greedy, agent. Instead of 7%, how about 6%? And if you did, let's see, 6%, 24,000 compared to 28,000 for $4,000 difference in commission, I don't think that would really accomplish their goal, right? But they're going to start picking your pocket probably. And it's up to you to decide if you're going to let them. Are you going to come down on your commission? I might, if they're going to use me to help them sell this one, but also help them buy that next one. I'll do that all day long because I'm making commission on this one that we're talking about now, but I'm also going to make something on the one they're buying that the builder's paying me anyway, and they don't have to come out of pocket to pay me on that one, most likely, right? Great point. In the chat, somebody says this, which bears repeating. They say, so you wouldn't take the 372.8 and multiply times 7 and add that back into the 372.8. That's what everybody tries to do. And so you're in good company. But the problem with doing that is you want to get paid commission on the sales price, not the net price. The 372.8 is the net after they pay your commission, and you've just cheated yourself. Let's see how much you did yourself out of if you make that mistake. And maybe you, in the heat of the moment, you start quoting things and you said something to them. So 372.8 at 7% is $26,096 to you. Well, total commission. But we found out that the actual price needs to be $400,860. That's what the sales price needs to be. And if we do that, that's $28,060. You cost yourself $2,000 because you based your 7% on the lower number. You based it on the net price, not the list price. It's sort of like how I told you that new construction builder will do you sometimes. They'll say, well, I'm not going to pay you commission on the price after all the upgrades and stuff that the buyer picks. I'm only going to pay you based on the base price. That's sort of kind of what you just did there. Yep. Good job. So here's another one. Homer wants to walk away from closing with $235,000 in his pocket. His mortgage balance is $190,000. His other expenses include a home equity line of credit. That means basically a debit card tied to your equity of your house, and every time you spend money, you're decreasing your equity in your house because you're spending it. The bank gives it to you because they know they'll get it back when you sell your house. So he's got to pay off two loans. A mortgage loan of $190,000 and a second mortgage, which is basically what that is, of $80,000. Repairs needed $11,000. Attorney fees $2,700. Broker commissions 5%. How much does I used different names. How much does Homer need to sell his property for in order to end up with $235,000 at closing? So we've got the $235,000 he wants. We've got to pay $190,000. We got to pay $80,000. We got to pay $11,000 and $2,700. All of that adds up to $518,700. And all of that does not include your commission. So we rewrite it as $518,700 divided by the seller's portion of the sale price. Since you're charging 5%, then the seller is left with 95% of the sale price. So we're dividing 518.7 by the 95, and that means it needs to sell for 546 in order for you to be happy and for the seller to pay off their expenses and end up with 235 in their pocket. You better believe some of the answer choices will be based on wrong calculations. One of those answer choices is probably based on things that you could leave out. Maybe you forgot to put in the attorney fees. You forgot to do 11,000 here. So just because you see an answer that matches with what you got doesn't mean it's right. You're going to want to be confident in your steps and that you did the right procedure. So 546 in this case is the right answer. Recap, and then we're done with this chapter. Listing agreement is not an offer to sell. Just because they listed it with you doesn't mean that they have to take an offer. But what if it's a full price offer? What if it's $30,000 over the asking price? They can still say no. And I train them on this when they're nervous about selling. I remind them, look, seller, don't be so nervous. It's okay. Even if we got 3 full price offers, you are never going to be required to take them. Odds are they're going to take one of them in real life. So we're not like giving them a way out so much. We're just getting them less nervous about the selling. But I say to them, look, no big deal. I mean, it might hurt my feelings a little bit if I put in the time and the effort and the money to try to get it sold and bring you an offer and you turn it down. But if it's not right for you in that moment and you change your mind or for whatever reason, you will not be forced to sell your house and accept an offer. Now, once they accept the offer, that's a different ballgame. Now, if they back out, it's called breach of contract, and that's a different story. But the offers are coming in. They can choose to turn them all down. That listing agreement is basically an employment contract. They're saying, hey, firm, I'm going to give you a chance to try to find a ready, willing, and able buyer. It does not obligate him to sell, even if it meets or exceeds the terms. Now, it might obligate them to pay you a commission if you've produced a ready, willing, and able buyer, and then they're just like, you know what, never mind. Forget you. I don't want to sell it. Or I want to let my cousin try it, even though I've given you 3 weeks and you've done all the stuff that you do, but I want to fire you and hire them. That's a whole other issue. Your firm probably wouldn't let him out of the listing agreement in that case. You could say, well, I produced you a cash buyer and you signed it and it's under contract. Now you owe me a commission. All of those things could be. So don't let all of that possibility enter your mind when you're reading the test problem. If it's not something stated in the problem, don't consider it in your answer. If you start thinking to yourself, yeah, but, then you're probably reading too much into it. You need to take at face value, what they're asking you with that info only, and answer it only based on that information. So what are the consequences of a seller not taking an offer? Not much. Eventually, if they're being ridiculous, you're going to have a conversation and be like, do you still want to sell it? And if not, we're 3 months to go on a listing term and you want out, then I'm going to have a conversation with my broker in charge to see if they'll let you out of it. But once they sign a contract, again, bigger consequences. Oh, yeah, let me see. In the chat, always round up when calculating. Do they ever put an answer choice as the exact number? No. A rounded option will not cost you an answer. In other words, they're not going to give you the 2 answer choices just because you rounded differently or wrong. The answered choices on the test will not be a rounding error different. As long as it's within a few dollars, you're probably safe to pick that one. Because it might be that you left the entire number in the calculator, right? So look like the calculator here. If we did that number, well, I don't know, some huge number, that's way more number in the calculator than we can see on the display. There's many more numbers than those, what is that, 6 numbers? And so if we were to round this off to just 3.68 and multiply it by another thing, it's going to be a lot different answer. Let's say we multiply this by 2, 3.68. So that whole number by 2 is a huge another number versus 3.68 times 2 is, right? So the point is, did you clear it out and enter it back in as a rounded version, or did you just leave the big fat number in there and keep working on your math? You won't have those 2 choices as 2 answer choices. They're not going to do that to you. They're not trying to test you on calculator usage. They're testing you on real estate. So don't worry about that. All right. We are done with 8, which means tomorrow we get into 9. And it looks a little something like this. Yeah, there we go. So I'm not going to go into it now, but it's the first hour and a half is the contract. There we go. 9, yeah, about an hour and a half, hour and 45 is going to be basic contract law, stuff you'd see on the national portion of the exam, just basics of contract law. Then we'll get more into 7.5 hours related to North Carolina specific and our procedures and how contracts work. After that, that'll be this week and next week. Then we'll get into finance. That'll be 7 hours, then closing for 8 hours, and then valuation for 6. And then it's that little bundle of 1 and 2 hour. Oops, sorry. I'm just going to town and not showing you. There it is. A little bundle of 1 and 2 hour topics down here. You can't see my cursor. Maybe you can. And along the way, we'll have continued to cover license law. So don't forget to keep reading that license law comment section and the laws and rules themselves. Hopefully you've gotten through it at least once, maybe twice. The comment section. We'll talk about, I think, the first bit of it is the super basics of the comment section. The next chunk is about willful and negligent omission and misrepresentation. Then it talks about trust accounts, and it also talks about timeshares. So those are sort of the big major 4 or 5 chunks in the comment section, and we'll make our way through that. By the time we get here, this night, whatever 2 nights that happens to be, will be more review of the entire course as a whole. If you haven't yet done the quarter term exam, go ahead and do that. Because next week, let me think, tomorrow and Wednesday. Yeah, probably after next week, we'll go ahead and clear you to take the midterm exam. You'll have enough content under your belt for that to be worth your time. And so anything that's not at that point, anything that you haven't taken, you should have already taken except for the final prep, the prep for the final practice exam. With that said, have a lovely 20 hours. I'll see you in about that amount of time, and let me know if any questions.